Hey there, tonight we're uncovering why it sucked to be a Viking slave, where the truth is far from the wild tales of epic feasts and heroic sagas, revealing a life of harsh labor and limited freedom at the edges of the Viking world. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. So, ever thought about the thrill of living like a Viking? The open seas, the horned helmets. Except, spoiler alert, those helmets didn't have horns, and the endless adventure. Sounds like a dream, right? But let's pump the brakes a bit. What if I told you that for many people it was less about pillaging and more about being, well, pillaged? Welcome to the less glamorous side of Viking life, being a thrall. Thralls, my friend, were the uncelebrated workforce of Viking society. And by uncelebrated, I mean they were basically the human equivalent of a Swiss Army knife. Useful, versatile, and, unfortunately, easily replaceable. Their story isn't one of glory and epic battles, but of harsh realities and daily grind. They were the backbone of the Norse economy, doing the dirty work so the free folks could chase those epic sagas and skaldic poetry. But let's rewind to the infamous year of 793 AD. Picture Lindisfarne, a peaceful monastery off the northeast coast of England, minding its own business. Enter the Vikings, stage left, with axes and a flair for drama. This raid shocked the Christian world and was like the Viking calling card, bold, brash, and utterly terrifying for the folks on the receiving end. These raids were not just about grabbing gold. They were also a prime recruitment drive for new thralls. Your life could change faster than you can say longship, from a peaceful farmer to a Viking thrall. The Vikings were equal opportunity enslavers, raiding both sides of the North Sea. They weren't picky about who they captured. Women, men, children. If you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, congratulations. You just won a one-way ticket to Scandinavia. But why did these folks need so many thralls, you ask? Let's talk supply and demand. Viking society thrived on the labor of these unfortunates. They worked in the fields, maintained households, and even rowed the longships that ferried their captors to new conquests. Basically, they were the engine behind the Viking economy. And just in case you're thinking the life of a thrall had a silver lining like, maybe they got to wear cool Viking outfits, think again. Thralls had the social status of a garden gnome, decorative, functional, but definitely not something you'd want to be. They had no rights, no freedom, and no say in their destinies. They were property, plain and simple, more akin to livestock than laborers. And in case you're wondering, yes, this was as grim as it sounds. The Vikings had a pragmatic approach to slavery. If you were a thrall, you were a commodity. You could be sold, traded, or even set free if your master was in a particularly generous mood, though that was about as common as a snowstorm in July. In fact, written sources like the Icelandic Graga's law code show that freeing a thrall was more the exception than the rule. But hey, if you did manage to secure your freedom, you wouldn't become a full-fledged Viking warrior overnight. Your new life would still be an uphill battle, clawing your way up the social ladder from formerly property to barely noticed. Now, let's add a sprinkle of dark humor to this sobering tale. Imagine the thralls rowing tirelessly on a Viking ship, probably not thinking, wow, what a great arm workout. More like, can we stop for a bathroom break? But there was no rest for the weary. Those seas weren't going to cross themselves, and the Vikings had a tight schedule of raiding and conquering to keep. The irony here is that while the Vikings are often seen as these fierce, independent warriors, their society depended heavily on those they subjugated. Thralls kept the farms running, ensured the households were in order, and even participated in the very raids that captured more of their own. You could say the Viking economy was built on a foundation of irony and involuntary servitude. And here's a fun fact. The very word thrall comes from the Old Norse trail, meaning slave. It's where we get the English word enthrall. Today means to captivate or charm. So next time you're enthralled by a Viking movie, remember it's a small nod to those who lived anything but a life of adventure and romance. As we sail through this series, remember, the Viking Age wasn't all horned helmets and epic battles. For every warrior etched into the annals of history, there were countless thralls who toiled in obscurity. They were the unsung, the unfree, and often the forgotten. But their story deserves to be told, if only to remind us that even in an age of legends, there were those who had to live the less-than-glamorous reality. And speaking of those unsung stories, let's dive into a typical day in the life of a thrall, where waking up wasn't just about facing morning breath, but the breath of a society that barely acknowledged your existence. Imagine kicking off your day before the sun even thought about rising, because if you were a thrall, you were the original early bird, minus the worm, and with a heavy dose of Viking expectations instead. Now, let's break down the numbers. Estimates suggest that around 20 to 30% of Viking populations were enslaved individuals. That means if you were strolling through a Norse settlement, a significant chunk of the people you met were thralls. Think of it like modern startups where interns, except without the lattes and foosball tables, are everywhere doing the heavy lifting while the CEOs plot their next acquisition. For a thrall, grueling work was the menu du jour every day. Picture this. You're knee-deep in mud, planting or harvesting crops, because Viking society wasn't exactly a fan of food shortages. Agriculture was the bread and butter, literally, of the Norse economy, and thralls were the ones ploughing the fields, sowing the seeds, and harvesting the grain that kept everyone else fed, including those off raiding and pillaging. It was a cycle as relentless as a Scandinavian winter. And if you thought agriculture was the whole story, think again. Thralls were also the unsung heroes of construction. They built the longhouses that sheltered the free Norsemen from the biting winds, and let's just say the health and safety regulations were about as non-existent as Wi-Fi in the 9th century. Forget about hard hats. You were more likely to be wearing a brow full of sweat and a backache that could rival a modern office worker's after an 8-hour Zoom call. Then there was the domestic side of life, where thralls were the backbone of household management. Cooking, cleaning, fetching water, tasks that sound like a weekend chore list, but were a daily grind for these folks. It's said that thralls even churned butter, which sounds quaint until you realize it's no stroll through a dairy aisle. More like an arm workout that'd make even the burliest Viking warrior wince. In terms of legal status, well, let's just say the thralls were about as empowered as a medieval doormat. According to the laws of the time, they were property, pure and simple. If you were a thrall, your legal rights were non-existent. You couldn't own property, testify in court, or even marry without your owner's permission. It's the kind of life that makes you appreciate modern concepts like human rights and weekends. The societal norms of the day ensured that thralls stayed in their place, quite literally. They lived in separate quarters, often adjacent to the dwellings of their owners, a constant reminder of their status. This spatial arrangement was a visual cue of their subservience, much like the cubicles that separate the C-suite from the rest of the workforce in today's corporate landscape. The parallels are hard to ignore. Economically, thralls were indispensable. Their labor kept the Viking economy humming, allowing the free Norsemen to engage in trade, conquest, and the occasional leisurely saga recital. You could say that thralls were the silent partners in the Viking enterprise, though partnership implies a level of choice and equality that was sorely lacking. The Vikings may have been fierce warriors, but their society's stability rested on the shoulders of those who couldn't even call their own lives their own. And here's an ironic twist. Despite their lack of rights, thralls were sometimes allowed to handle money. They could earn a small amount through side work, a practice akin to a modern side hustle. This tiny glimpse of economic agency was a double-edged sword. It offered a sliver of hope for buying freedom, but also highlighted just how far they were from true autonomy. So, while the Viking Age is often romanticized as an era of adventure and freedom, for the thralls, it was a life of toil, with freedom as elusive as a Norse myth. Their contribution to Viking society was immense yet invisible, much like the foundation of a grand building, critical, yet forever hidden from view. As we continue to unravel the threads of Viking life, remember that behind every legendary figure was a thrall, working in the shadows, a testament to the resilience and perseverance of those who lived the harsh reality so others could live the legend. Stay tuned as we continue to navigate the Viking world, where for every tale of glory, there's a story that's decidedly less glamorous, but no less important. Now, speaking of legends and the unsung labor behind them, let's dig deeper into the cultural stew of Viking society, where the thrall's role was more than just grunt work. It was a harsh, complex reality wrapped in layers of social dynamics. Picture the Viking social hierarchy as a three-tiered cake, but instead of cream and sponge, it's layered with freedom, semi-freedom, and good luck with that freedom. At the top, you've got the Jarls, the elite, living their best lives with power and privilege. Below them are the Carls, the free farmers and craftsmen, who enjoyed a fair bit of autonomy. And then, at the soggy bottom, were the thralls, the enslaved laborers, whose lives were about as sweet as a lemon. Now, here's the kicker. Unlike other slave-owning societies, the Vikings had a surprisingly pragmatic, if brutal, approach to manumission, the act of freeing a slave. It wasn't just an act of benevolence, but a calculated economic decision. You see, a thrall could theoretically earn their freedom, though in reality it was akin to winning the lottery with a ticket you couldn't afford. The Icelandic Gragars, a legal code as icy and uncompromising as its name, detailed how a thrall might buy their freedom, often requiring a sum equivalent to their market value, a sum as steep as the cliffs of the Norwegian fjords. But let's not get carried away with the idea of a happy ending here. Manumission was rare, a glimmer of hope in a sea of despair. For every thrall who managed to claw their way to freedom, there were countless others who lived and died in servitude. If a thrall did gain their freedom, they entered the murky waters of semi-freedom, where they were known as lacing jar. Think of it as moving from a studio apartment in a sketchy neighborhood to a slightly larger one with better locks, but still in the same zip code. Now, about those brutal punishments. You might think the Vikings, with all their adventurous spirit, had a laissez-faire attitude toward discipline. Not so much. Being a thrall came with its own grisly set of rules. Corporal punishment was a fact of life, as routine as milking the cows. The sagas, those epic tales of Viking exploits, are peppered with references to masters who didn't hesitate to use the whip. The Gulating Law, one of Norway's oldest legal codes, laid it out plain as day. Disobedient thralls could be beaten, maimed, or even killed without consequence. And let's not forget the sexual exploitation that was as rampant as it was ignored. Thralls, especially women, were often subjected to the whims of their owners. This grim reality was so widespread that it barely warranted a mention in the sagas, a disturbing testament to how normalized such brutality was. The romanticized image of Viking women as shield maidens, fierce and free, loses some of its sheen when you remember that many women lived as thralls, their lives dictated by the men who owned them. Legal codes from the Viking era, like the aforementioned Gragars and the Frost-Athing Law, paint a picture of a society where the line between freedom and servitude was as clear as mud. These laws were as much about maintaining the status quo as they were about justice. For instance, if a thrall was killed by a free man, the compensation, known as wergild, was significantly less than for a free person. It was a stark reminder that even in death, a thrall's value was diminished. And yet, Viking society wasn't entirely devoid of nuance. There were instances where thralls played significant roles beyond mere labor. Some became trusted members of their masters' households, a testament to their skills, or simply the result of long years of servitude. The sagas occasionally mention thralls who gained respect and even wielded influence, though these stories are as rare as a sunny day in Reykjavik. Economically, thralls were an investment. Owning a thrall was not just about status, but also about profit. A well-managed thrall could generate income through farming, crafting, or even trading. Yes, you heard that right. Some thralls were involved in commerce, albeit under the watchful eye of their masters. It's a twisted reflection of the entrepreneurial spirit, where even those in chains could contribute to the wealth of their captors. In this complex social tapestry, the dynamics between Vikings and their thralls were as tangled as a longship's rigging. It's easy to romanticize the Vikings as noble warriors, but the reality was far more brutal. Their society thrived on a foundation of exploitation, where freedom was a privilege for the few and servitude was a sentence for the many. So, as we continue to unravel the Viking world, let's not lose sight of the darker threads that wove their society together. Behind the tales of valor and exploration lies a story of human complexity and harsh realities, one that reminds us that even the most legendary cultures were built on the backs of those who could only dream of freedom. Stay tuned, because the Viking Age has more layers than an onion, and we're just starting to peel them back. And speaking of layers, let's peel back the curtain on the Viking Age and peek into the bustling marketplaces of Dublin and Hedeby, places where the hum of trade and the clank of coin met the quiet despair of human lives bought and sold. Because if you thought the Vikings were just swinging axes and singing sea shanties, think again. They were also shrewd businessmen, and their idea of commerce often included a side of human trafficking. Now, if you're picturing Viking settlements as isolated outposts with nothing but fjords and fish, it's time to reset that mental GPS. The Norse were as connected as a modern-day influencer, with trade links stretching across Europe and beyond. And guess what was often on the cargo list? You got it, thralls. These living commodities were as integral to Viking trade as furs and amber. Let's start with Dublin, a city now famous for Guinness and literary giants. But back in the 9th century, it was a thriving Norse trading hub. Founded by Vikings around 841 AD, Dublin quickly became one of Europe's busiest slave markets. Picture the scene, longships lining the riverbanks, their holds not just brimming with goods, but with people, each with a price tag and a grim future. It's estimated that 1/3 of Dublin's population were slaves, a statistic that would make any modern city planner choke on their coffee. But Dublin wasn't just a market. It was a nodal point in an extensive network that saw thralls transported across seas and continents. From here, they could end up in the British Isles, the Frankish lands, or even the more exotic reaches of the Mediterranean. It's the kind of logistics network that would make even Amazon blush. Speaking of the Frankish lands, let's hop over to the Carolingian Empire, where slavery was also a thriving enterprise. Unlike the Vikings, who were equal opportunity enslavers, the Carolingians had a more hierarchical approach. Their society was structured like a medieval version of a corporate org chart, with kings and nobility at the top, and you guessed it, slaves at the bottom. Slavery in the Carolingian Empire was more institutionalized, with entire villages often bound to the whims of their Frankish overlords. The Carolingians, under the rule of Charlemagne and his successors, weren't just expanding their empire through conquest, they were also expanding their workforce. Enslaved people were used in agriculture, construction, and as domestic servants, much like their Norse counterparts. However, the Carolingians had a penchant for converting their captives to Christianity, which added a layer of religious complexity to the institution of slavery. In comparing the two societies, it's like looking at two sides of the same grim coin. Both used slavery as a tool of economic and social control. But while the Vikings were more about pragmatic trade, the Carolingians wrapped their practices in a cloak of religious righteousness. The Vikings had no qualms about trading with their Christian neighbors, thralls and all, revealing a level of economic opportunism that defied religious boundaries. Now, let's sail back north to Hedeby, a bustling Viking emporium located in what is now Germany. Hedeby was the place to be, a cosmopolitan center where traders from the east and west converged, bringing with them goods from the Silk Road, spices, and of course, human cargo. The market here was as vibrant as Times Square, minus the neon lights, but with a similar thrum of commerce. Hedeby's strategic location on the Jutland Peninsula made it a key player in the Viking trading network. Here, thralls were bartered alongside luxuries like silk and spices, a stark reminder of the human cost behind those glittering wares. It's like buying a Rolex and realizing it was assembled in a sweatshop, only much, much darker. What these bustling trade routes tell us is that the Vikings were anything but isolated. Far from being lone wolves, they were deeply integrated into the broader European economy, their longships crisscrossing the seas like medieval delivery vans. Their trade networks stretched from the cold waters of the North Atlantic to the warm shores of the Mediterranean, with thralls as a common denominator. This interconnectedness debunks the myth of the Vikings as mere barbaric raiders living on the fringes of civilization. They were, in fact, savvy operators in a globalized world, using their navigational prowess not just for conquest, but for commerce. And while their reputation as fearsome warriors is well-earned, it's their role as traders and slave merchants that reveals the full complexity of Viking society. It's a narrative as twisted as a Norse knot, where the romantic image of the Viking warrior must be balanced against the harsh reality of their economic practices. The Vikings may have been legendary seafarers, but their legacy is anchored in the lives of those they subjugated and traded. The thralls, those unsung cogs in the Viking machine, were the human currency that oiled the gears of this vast network. So, while the Viking Age is often painted with broad strokes of adventure and heroism, it's worth remembering the darker shades that fill in the details. Behind every epic saga of exploration lies a story of exploitation, a reminder that history is as much about the unsung as it is about the celebrated. As we navigate this intricate web of trade and tyranny, keep in mind that the Viking world was a tapestry of connections, a network forged in the fires of conflict and commerce. And like any good tapestry, the closer you look, the more you see the threads of human lives woven into its design. Stay with me, because there's more to uncover in this saga of splendor and subjugation. We're just setting sail on this journey through the Viking Age, and the wind is at our backs. And so, as our longship of historical exploration glides into calmer waters, it's time to reflect on the legacy of the Viking Age, where the reality and the myth clash like swords in a mead hall brawl. You see, history has a funny way of playing telephone with the past, where the whispers of reality get twisted into the shouts of legend. The Vikings are no exception. They're remembered as the ultimate adventurers, those fierce, freedom-loving warriors with a penchant for pillaging. But let's not forget, for every Eric the Red, there were countless unnamed thralls who had about as much choice in the matter as you do in picking relatives. Why do these myths persist, you ask? Well, who doesn't love a good story? The image of the Viking marauder, the embodiment of raw, untamed freedom, is as intoxicating as a horn of ale. It's the stuff of blockbuster movies and binge-worthy series, but media loves a hero, or anti-hero, and the grim truth of economic exploitation and human misery doesn't quite sell tickets like a well-timed axe toss. In modern media, Vikings are often portrayed as the ultimate rebels, bucking the system and living by their own rules. It's a narrative that appeals to the adventurer in all of us, but the reality was far more pragmatic. The Norse seafarers were as much about counting coins as they were about collecting conquests. They were as likely to wield a ledger as a longsword, navigating the treacherous waters of commerce as deftly as they did the stormy seas. But here's the rub. Acknowledging the harsh realities of Viking slavery doesn't diminish their achievements. Instead, it enriches our understanding of them as a complex society. They were not just raiders or traders, but people with families, economies, and yes, their own brand of morality. Understanding the role of slavery in their society gives us a fuller picture of who the Vikings really were. It's like watching a black and white film in color for the first time. And speaking of color, let's paint a picture of the Viking legacy that acknowledges both the light and the dark. On one hand, their seafaring exploits are legendary. They discovered new lands, like Greenland and Vinland, long before Columbus could even tie his shoelaces. But behind these bold ventures lay the backs of the thralls, rowing tirelessly or tending to the fields, the unsung heroes of Norse expansion. What's important here is the lesson in the complexity of human societies. The Vikings were capable of great achievements, but their society was also built on a foundation of inequality. Recognizing this duality is crucial for understanding the past in its entirety. It's a reminder that history isn't just a series of heroic deeds, but a tapestry woven with threads of both triumph and tragedy. Now, if you're feeling a bit like a thrall yourself, slogging through the grim realities of Viking life, take heart. There's a silver lining, or at least a copper one, in understanding these truths. It allows us to appreciate the progress we've made and the rights we now consider inalienable. In a world where thralls couldn't even own their own lives, modern concepts like freedom and equality shine all the brighter. Moreover, by debunking the myths, we do justice to those who lived in the shadows of history. By telling their stories alongside those of their more celebrated captors, we acknowledge their place in the grand narrative of human history. It's a nod to the resilience of the human spirit, a testament to those who endured the harshest of circumstances. In closing, the Viking Age was a saga of contrasts, a time of exploration and exploitation, of legendary warriors and the laborers who made their legends possible. By peeling back the layers of myth, we reveal a society as complex and multifaceted as the fjords themselves. And as we sail back to the present, let's carry with us the understanding that history, much like the Vikings, is never as simple as it seems. It's a tale of valor and vice, a story of glory and grit. And maybe, just maybe, That's what makes it so enthralling. You're snuggled in your sleeping bag, if you can call this scratchy woolen blanket a sleeping bag, and the sun is already poking its nosy beams through the seams of your tent. Welcome to the year 1849, the height of the California gold rush. The smell of campfire smoke and sweat from your fellow prospectors wafts through the air, a scent you'll begrudgingly get used to if you want to make it big as a gold miner. But spoiler alert, the making it big part, not as easy as the stories have led you to believe. Let's rewind a bit. The madness kicked off in January 1848 when James W. Marshall found shiny metal at Sutter's Mill in Coloma, California. You know, just another day, inspecting a sawmill, and boom, gold. Word spread faster than a prairie fire, and suddenly everyone and their grandmother wanted a piece of the action. By 1849, the gold rush was in full swing, drawing people from all corners of the globe like moths to a particularly deceptive flame. But before you could even think about striking it rich, you had to get here. And that was no walk in the park. First off, there were three main routes to consider: overland, around Cape Horn, or through the Panama shortcut. The overland trek involved a 2,000-mile journey across plains, mountains, and deserts. Hope you're comfy in your wagon, because that trip could take 4 to 6 months. And let's not forget the cost. Roughly $200 to $300 per person, which in today's money is a tidy sum over $6,000. Maybe you thought you'd be clever and take a ship around Cape Horn. That's a mere 18,000 miles, give or take, and up to 8 months at sea. Seasickness, scurvy, and boredom were included at no extra charge. Or perhaps you'd opt for the Panama route. Shorter, sure, but you'd face the joys of sweltering jungles and tropical diseases. Either way, you'd need a hefty purse. Tickets could run $400 to $600, the equivalent of $13,000 to $20,000 today. That's a steep price for a gamble. Let's fast forward back to you in your tent. You finally made it, braving whatever route you chose. You're now one of the 300,000 hopefuls who have flooded California. The population of San Francisco alone ballooned from a sleepy 1,000 in 1848 to a bustling 25,000 by 1850. A city of tents and dreams, both just as flimsy. But here's the kicker. You're not alone in realizing that gold isn't lying around like forgotten pennies on the street. The real money makers turned out to be the ones selling supplies and services. Think of Sam Brannan, the savvy businessman who practically invented the concept of the gold rush influencer. He famously ran through San Francisco shouting, "Gold, gold, gold from the American River," after buying up every pickaxe, pan, and shovel he could find. Those tools, they sold for about $20 each, a princely sum, considering they probably cost him a fraction of that. Meanwhile, you might be shelling out $100 for boots or $40 for a simple pan. Talk about a golden opportunity, just not for the miners. So, you find yourself navigating this human anthill, where every necessity is marked up like a trendy pop-up shop in Manhattan. Eggs, if you can find them, go for $1 a piece, about $30 nowadays. Bread, 2 bits or 25 cents, which doesn't sound like much until you realize that's the equivalent of $8 today. And let's not even talk about the cost of a haircut or a night at the saloon. The myth of instant riches dies hard, but it's the reality of scarcity and steep prices that truly tests your mettle. It's not just gold panning, it's survival of the fittest, or at least the most frugal. But despite all this, the allure of fortune keeps you going. You're fueled by tales of lucky strikes, rumors of pockets of gold just waiting to be found, and that ever-hopeful gambler's spirit. As the sun climbs higher, you roll out of your tent, ready to face another day of back-breaking labor. You're more likely to find blisters on your hands than nuggets in your pan, but who knows? Maybe today is the day luck turns in your favor. In the grand tapestry of history, the gold rush is a wild, colorful thread, full of dreams and disappointments. It's a reminder that while the legend is all about finding treasure, the reality is often about the journey, and the hefty toll it takes on the body and the wallet. But for now, you've got a pickaxe to swing, a river to sift, and a dream to chase. Welcome to 1849, where the gold may be elusive, but the adventure, oh, that's guaranteed. So you're up, stretching out the kinks from a night of questionable comfort, and it's time to join the swarm of hopefuls trudging toward the diggings. You're one in a wave of miners, each more optimistic than the last, wielding pickaxes and gold pans like talismans against the harsh, unyielding reality of these Californian hills. Welcome to the daily grind, where the glitter of gold is more often a mirage than a payday. As you stumble to the riverbank, let's talk tools. The pan is your first friend, a humble metal dish that's supposed to reveal your fortune. The technique? Simple, yet infuriatingly tedious. Scoop up some dirt, add water, swirl, and pray. You're essentially a human salad spinner, hoping gold is the crouton in your silt and gravel mix. But pans are just the beginning. You'll soon graduate to rockers, wooden boxes mounted on rockers or sleds. These contraptions let you wash larger amounts of soil. They're the SUV of the gold rush. Big, clunky, and often more trouble than they're worth. There's also the sluice box, a long, narrow trough that separates gold from gravel using riffles. It's the conveyor belt of dreams, but setting one up is a workout in itself. Each piece of equipment is a step up in complexity, and let's be real, back-breaking effort. You're not just mining gold, you're mining experience, slowly realizing why the phrase, golden opportunity, has such a sardonic ring to it. Now, imagine this. You're knee-deep in a freezing river, arms aching from hours of panning, and your stomach growls louder than a grizzly. The romantic vision of striking it rich is quickly replaced by the unforgiving reality of relentless labor. You're working dusk till dawn, driven by the same gambler's itch that brought you here. But here's the kicker. You might find just enough gold to buy another week of supplies. The real treasure, as you're discovering, is stamina. And let's not forget the delightful legal chaos that is claim disputes. The law of the land is about as clear as the muddy water you're sifting through. Sure, you've staked your claim, maybe even scratched your name on a tree. But that doesn't stop someone from muscling in on your turf. With no formal legal framework, the concept of property rights is as shaky as the makeshift bridges over these turbulent streams. Mining camps often operated under the law of the first finder, a quaint notion when everyone's trying to be first. The environmental impact? Oh, it's a doozy. Rivers are rerouted, hillsides blasted, and the land is left scarred as miners chase their golden dreams. We're talking deforestation on a grand scale, with soil erosion and sedimentation turning once clear streams into murky sludge. It's a paradox of sorts, seeking something so pure while leaving behind such a mess. The landscape is reshaped, not just by tools and machinery, but by the sheer desperation of thousands of hands. As the sun reaches its zenith, you're covered in mud, sweat, and no small amount of frustration. The legendary tales of easy riches are starting to feel like bedtime stories. Nice to hear, but not exactly rooted in reality. The truth is, most miners never struck it rich. A few found their fortunes, sure, but for every lucky strike, there were countless others who found only dust and disappointment. But despite the hardships, the gold rush was an undeniable catalyst for change. It accelerated the development of California, transforming it from a sleepy backwater to a bustling hub almost overnight. In 1849, California wasn't even a state. By 1850, it was fast-tracked to statehood, thanks in no small part to the influx of people and the economic boom. It's a classic case of the American dream, a chaotic, messy, and often disillusioning pursuit of prosperity. So here you are, part of this grand experiment, each swing of the pickaxe a reminder of the gulf between myth and reality. The allure of gold is intoxicating, but it's also fleeting, a siren song that lures you into the grind. As you pause to catch your breath, you can't help but marvel at the human capacity for hope, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The gold rush is a testament to that relentless optimism, the stubborn belief that tomorrow might just be the day you strike it big. And as the day draws to a close, you drag yourself back to camp. The firelight flickers, casting shadows that dance like spirits of miners past. You're exhausted, but there's a strange satisfaction in the toil. The gold may be elusive, but the camaraderie, the stories shared over a meal, and the shared struggle, that's the real payoff, even if it's not the one you came for. So, as you lay down to rest, let the dreams of gold fill your head. Because who knows? Tomorrow might just be the day your pan reveals that elusive glint. And if not, well, there's always the adventure, and the knowledge that you're part of something much larger than yourself. A chapter in the wild, unpredictable story of the American West. The sun will rise again, and with it, a new day of possibilities. and the ever-present hope of fortune. Welcome to the gold rush, where the journey is the true treasure, and the dream never truly dies. As you drift into a restless sleep, fueled by dreams of gold and the crackling campfire, let's hit pause and take a closer look at the society swirling around you. The California gold rush wasn't just a magnet for wannabe millionaires. It was a cultural melting pot boiling over with tension, exchange, and the occasional fistfight. Welcome to the human side of the gold rush, where the real treasure was diversity, though not everyone appreciated it at the time. Picture the scene. Thousands of people converging on California from every corner of the globe, each carrying their own hopes, fears, and languages. By 1852, just a few years after the rush kicked off, over 20,000 Chinese immigrants had made their way to California. They were part of a massive wave, lured by tales of Gam San, or Gold Mountain. Their arrival was marked not just by their distinctive straw hats and bamboo hats, but by the vibrant Chinatowns that began to sprout up, offering a taste of home in a foreign land. Yet the allure of gold was quickly overshadowed by the shadow of discrimination. The foreign miners' tax of 1,850 slapped a $20 monthly fee on non-citizen miners, nearly $550 in today's money, a steep price for those already struggling to make a living. The tax was a blatant attempt to push out Chinese miners, who were often seen as competitors by their white counterparts. And if that wasn't enough, they faced violence and prejudice, a harsh contradiction to the myth of the free, egalitarian frontier. Let's not forget the Latin American miners, who also flocked to the goldfields. Many came from Mexico, Chile, and Peru, bringing with them advanced mining techniques and a rich cultural heritage. Yet they too faced hostility. The Californios, as Mexican residents were known, found themselves caught in a rapidly shifting landscape where their rights and claims were often ignored or outright dismissed. It was a bitter pill to swallow, especially considering that California had been part of Mexico just a few years earlier. And then there were the European immigrants, Irish, German, and Italian miners, among others, each carving out a niche in this chaotic new world. Their presence added to the rich tapestry of voices, but it also intensified the competition for resources and land. The promise of the American dream was a tantalizing prospect, but the reality was a scramble for survival, with each group trying to stake a claim in the shifting sands of opportunity. Now, let's zoom in on a group often overshadowed by the rugged tales of men with pickaxes, women. The gold rush wasn't just a boys' club, although you'd be forgiven for thinking otherwise, given the male-dominated narratives. Women were here too, and while some were prospectors, many found themselves offering services like laundry, cooking, and running boarding houses. These were the unsung heroines of the goldfields, providing stability in a tumultuous environment. Women also faced their own set of challenges. Social hierarchies were rigid, and opportunities for women were limited. Those who did venture into mining camps were often met with a mix of fascination and prejudice. Yet, there were trailblazers like Lucina Stanley Wilson, who ran a successful hotel and dining business, proving that grit and business savvy could shine as brightly as any gold nugget. The Gold Rush Society was a paradox of sorts, an egalitarian dream on paper, yet rife with discrimination and exploitation. The myth of the frontier as a great equalizer crumbles under the weight of reality, where the color of your skin or the language you spoke could dictate your chances of success. Labor exploitation was rampant, with miners often working for meager wages under harsh conditions, their dreams of wealth slipping through their fingers like the silt they sifted. The tension was palpable, not just between different ethnic groups, but also between the haves and the have-nots. Power dynamics were as fluid as the rivers being mined, with wealth often concentrated in the hands of a few savvy entrepreneurs who sold goods and services rather than digging for gold themselves. It was a dog-eat-dog world, where the law of the land was more about who could shout the loudest or wield the most influence than about any official decree. Yet amid the chaos, there was a silver lining. Well, a gold one, if you will. The cultural exchanges, though fraught with conflict, also led to a blending of traditions, cuisines, and languages. Festivals and markets became spaces where different cultures could interact, albeit with an undercurrent of tension. The Chinese New Year, for instance, brought vibrant parades and fireworks, a stark contrast to the monotony of mining life. As you take a midday break, munching on a makeshift lunch of hardtack and beans, you can't help but marvel at the swirling mass of humanity around you. It's a living, breathing testament to the complexity of the American fabric, woven together by the threads of hope, desperation, and resilience. Each miner, each merchant, each cook, and washerwoman adds to this intricate tapestry, a reminder that the gold rush was about more than just the pursuit of wealth. It was about the forging of community, however imperfect. So as you sit there, resting your weary bones, take a moment to soak in this vibrant, volatile world around you. The gold may be elusive, but the stories, struggles, and triumphs of those who came seeking it are as rich and varied as the land itself. The frontier may not have been the great equalizer it was romanticized to be, but it was undeniably transformative, shaping not just the landscape, but the very essence of what it meant to be part of this new frontier. As the sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows across the camp, you gear up for the afternoon shift. The promise of gold may still be a distant glimmer, but the real treasure lies in the shared experience, the camaraderie forged in the crucible of hardship and hope. You're not just a miner, you're part of a grand experiment, a living chapter in the ever-evolving story of the American West. And as the day fades, you carry with you the lessons learned, the stories shared, and the indomitable spirit of those who dared to dream of a golden tomorrow. As the sun dips lower, casting a golden hue over the camp, let's shift our gaze from the individual slog of panning for gold to the broader economic whirlwind that's sweeping across California. The gold rush isn't just about nuggets and pans. It's a seismic event that's transforming dusty outposts into bustling boomtowns practically overnight. First off, let's talk San Francisco. This city is the ultimate before and after story. In 1848, it was a sleepy village with maybe 1,000 souls milling about. By 1850, it had exploded into a vibrant metropolis of over 25,000, all thanks to that shiny metal calling adventurers from every corner of the globe. It's like Silicon Valley, but instead of apps and stock options, everyone's after gold and glory. Buildings popped up like mushrooms after rain, with hotels, saloons, and yes, brothels lining the streets. Real estate prices skyrocketed faster than you can say gold fever. A plot of land that was $10 in 48 could fetch thousands just a couple years later. The city was a canvas, painted with the dreams and cash of the hopeful and the enterprising. But the real magic wasn't just in the dirt, it was in the supply chain. Enter the merchants and entrepreneurs, the true winners of the gold rush lottery. These guys weren't just selling shovels. They were selling dreams, hopes, and the promise of striking it rich. We've already met Sam Brannan, but let's not forget about Levi Strauss, a name that should ring a bell. He showed up in San Francisco with a stockpile of tough canvas, intending to make tents. Instead, he found a demand for durable trousers that could withstand the rigors of mining life. Boom, denim jeans were born, and a fashion icon was made. The man never mined an ounce of gold, but he cashed in on the miners' needs and walked away with pockets as deep as the mines themselves. And here's the kicker. While miners were breaking their backs for a few specks of gold, merchants were raking in the real wealth. Prices were absurd. We're talking $150 for a pair of boots and $40 for a shovel, equivalent to thousands today. It was capitalism in its rawest form, no holds-barred game of supply and demand, where even a simple egg could cost the modern equivalent of $30. The miners might have been chasing gold, but it was the merchants who were laughing all the way to the bank. Meanwhile, the economic tsunami of the gold rush was rippling far beyond California's borders. The influx of gold into the national economy helped stabilize the U.S. currency, boosting trade and investment. Banks, often wary of frontier ventures, suddenly found themselves flush with deposits from successful entrepreneurs. It was like hitting the reset button on the economy, injecting a much-needed dose of vitality and confidence. And then there's the matter of statehood. Before the gold boom, California was a bit of a wild card, a territory with an identity crisis. But the sheer volume of people and wealth pouring in forced Uncle Sam to take notice. In 1850, just 2 years into the gold rush, California leapfrogged from territory to statehood. It was a political fast track, driven by the undeniable fact that the Golden State was too valuable to ignore. California's admission into the Union was a landmark moment, marking a shift in the balance of power and setting the stage for its role as an economic powerhouse. Now, let's debunk a persistent myth: the lone, rugged miner striking it rich. While a few did hit the jackpot, most found little more than sweat and disappointment. The real money wasn't in the gold itself, but in the infrastructure that supported the feverish dig. Think of it as the first tech boom, where the real winners weren't the coders, but the ones selling them the tools. From clothing to lodging to entertainment, if you could cater to the miners' needs, you were golden. Imagine a bustling market where everything has a price tag, and everyone's willing to pay. Take the boomtowns, for instance. These were places born of necessity, springing up along trails and near diggings, offering everything a miner could want, and plenty they didn't need. Towns like Bodie and Placerville became microcosms of capitalism, with saloons, gambling dens, and theaters offering escapes from the harsh reality of mining life. The boomtowns themselves were fleeting, often dissolving as quickly as they appeared, but their legacy is a testament to human ingenuity and adaptability. In essence, the gold rush was less about hitting the mother lode and more about the ripple effects. The industries spawned, the economies revitalized, and the very fabric of society transformed. It was a period of intense change, where fortunes could be made in a heartbeat or lost just as quickly. The gold may have been the spark, but it was the fire of enterprise that truly reshaped the West. As the day edges toward its end, and you head back to camp, it's clear that the gold rush wasn't just a quest for shiny rocks. It was an economic revolution, a catalyst for innovation, and a crucible of opportunity. The miners may not have found El Dorado, but they laid the groundwork for a state and a nation on the brink of modernity. And as the campfire crackles to life, you realize that the real treasure of the gold rush was the undeniable force of change it set into motion, a force that still felt in the bustling streets of San Francisco and beyond. The crackling campfire offers a cozy glow as you settle in for the evening, but let's not get too comfortable just yet. It's time to peel back the glittering facade of the gold rush and examine the long shadows it cast. Shadows that stretch far beyond the bustling boomtowns and the feverish dreams of fortune. This was a time when the promise of gold wasn't just a personal quest. It was a transformative force that reshaped landscapes and lives in ways few could have anticipated. First, let's tackle the environmental impact of this golden frenzy. Picture pristine Californian landscapes, once teeming with life, now scarred by the relentless pursuit of wealth. Rivers were rerouted, hillsides blasted, and forests decimated in the miners' quest for the precious metal. Hydraulic mining, the brainchild of some enterprising soul in the 1850s, was a particular environmental villain. It involved blasting away entire hillsides with high-pressure water jets, leaving behind barren moonscapes and a torrent of debris. By 1884, the environmental damage was so catastrophic that a federal court finally stepped in to ban the practice. But the scars on the land, they remain visible to this day, a testament to human ingenuity and its unintended consequences. Now, let's shift our focus to the human cost. The gold rush wasn't just a story of eager miners. It was a tale of displacement and disruption, particularly for California's Native American communities. Prior to 1848, an estimated 150,000 Native Americans called California home. But the arrival of miners brought not just competition for resources, but also disease, violence, and dispossession. By 1870, their numbers had plummeted to just 30,000, a staggering decline fueled by the toxic cocktail of greed and exploitation. Land that had been theirs for generations was seized, and the cultural fabric of their societies was torn apart in the name of progress. The romantic image of the lone prospector with a twinkle of gold in his eye tends to overshadow these harsh realities. But here's the kicker. While the gold rush is often celebrated for its spirit of adventure and opportunity, it also laid bare the darker side of human ambition. It was a microcosm of the American frontier myth, where the promise of prosperity came at a steep price, often paid by those who had the least to gain. Culturally, the gold rush was a crucible of change, a melting pot of ideas and influences that forged a new Californian identity. It was a chaotic blend of languages, traditions, and cuisines, with Chinese immigrants introducing new flavors and techniques, and Latin American miners bringing their own rich cultural heritage. Yet, amid this vibrant diversity, discrimination was rampant. The foreign miners' tax and other exclusionary policies served as stark reminders that the American dream wasn't equally accessible to all. In the grand narrative of American history, the gold rush occupies a curious space. It's enshrined in folklore as a time of rugged individualism and boundless opportunity. Yet the reality was far more complex. For every success story, there were countless tales of shattered dreams and personal ruin. The gold rush was less about striking it rich and more about the relentless pursuit, the chase, rather than the catch. Economically, the gold rush was a shot in the arm for the fledgling American economy. The influx of gold helped stabilize the currency, fueled investment, and laid the groundwork for California's emergence as an economic powerhouse. But the boom was as volatile as it was transformative. Towns like Bodie and Columbia sprang up overnight, only to wither away as the gold dried up, leaving behind ghostly echoes of their former glory. Politically, the gold rush accelerated California's path to statehood, altering the nation's balance of power. Overnight, what had been a sparsely populated territory became a bustling hub of activity and influence. The influx of people and wealth forced the United States to reckon with this new reality, leading to California's swift admission as the 31st state in 1850. It was a testament to the transformative power of gold, not just for individuals, but for an entire nation. As you sit by the fire, reflecting on the day's labor and the broader implications of this golden era, it's clear that the gold rush was more than just a historical footnote. It was a pivotal moment that reshaped the American West, leaving a legacy as complex as the characters who lived it. The romanticized tales of fortune hunters and their glittering dreams are enticing, but the truth is far richer and more sobering. In the end, the gold rush is a study in contrasts. It was a time of boundless possibility and profound loss, a testament to human imagination and its capacity for destruction. It's a reminder that while history often celebrates the victors, the true story is more nuanced, a tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, resilience, and sometimes heartbreak. So as you lay back and gaze at the starlit sky, let these reflections linger. The gold rush may have been a quest for gold, but it was also a journey into the heart of the human condition, a journey that's as relevant today as it was over 170 years ago. As the fire crackles and the night deepens, you find yourself part of this grand narrative, a living witness to the echoes of the past and the lessons it continues to impart. The gold rush is over, but its legacy endures, a golden thread woven into the fabric of American identity. In the grand theater of history, the Byzantine Empire before Justinian's reforms was less a well-oiled machine and more a chaotic performance where the actors frequently forgot their lines. The legal system could have given a Shakespearean tragedy a run for its money, with its convoluted plots and never-ending contradictions. Laws jostled for attention like overeager fans at a rock concert, each hoping to be the one that finally made sense of the chaos. Spoiler, none did. Before we get to Justinian himself, who, trust me, is a character worth waiting for, let's set the stage. The early 6th century Byzantine Empire was a sprawling, complex beast, stretching from the eastern Mediterranean to the fringes of Italy. It was a melting pot of cultures, languages, and of course laws. Imagine trying to whip up your grandmother's secret recipe, but every relative has a different version. That's kind of what it was like navigating Byzantine law pre-Justinian. A legal jambalaya with more ingredients than instructions. The Byzantine legal system was a mess, to put it mildly. It was a mishmash of Roman laws, local customs, imperial edicts, and religious decrees, all layered like a particularly confusing lasagna. And just like a lasagna that's been left in the oven too long, it was tough to digest. Citizens, merchants, and officials were often left scratching their heads, or, more likely, pulling out their hair. The laws contradicted each other like a family at Thanksgiving, and trying to get a straight answer was as futile as asking a politician a yes or no question. Now, why was it this way? Partly, it was because the empire was trying to juggle its Roman heritage with the practical realities of its diverse population. The urge to preserve Roman law, the granddaddy of all legal systems, was strong, but so was the necessity to adapt to new circumstances. The result, legal chaos. It was like trying to use a map of ancient Rome to navigate modern-day Istanbul. The political climate of the time didn't help, either. The Byzantine Empire was constantly under pressure, whether from external threats like the Persians or internal strife, such as revolts and religious disputes. The emperors of the time were like tightrope walkers, trying to keep their balance while juggling flaming swords. Efficiency wasn't exactly the order of the day. Survival was. Enter Justinian I, a man with a vision as big as his ambition. Born in 482 AD in what is now North Macedonia, Justinian was the nephew of Emperor Justin I, and he had a plan to make sense of the mess he'd inherited. He was like the ultimate neat freak, stepping into an episode of Hoarders, determined to clean up the Byzantine legal attic. His reforms were as much about cementing his legacy as they were about efficiency. After all, what better way to be remembered than as the emperor who finally got all the laws to play nice? Justinian came to the throne in 527 AD, and he didn't waste any time. He saw the Byzantine legal system as a tangled web that needed a serious detangling. His goal was to streamline the laws, get rid of the contradictions, and create a comprehensive legal code that would stand the test of time. In his mind, this wasn't just about making life easier for his subjects. It was about making a statement. He wanted to be known as the emperor who brought order to chaos, the guy who turned the Byzantine Empire's legal code from a Netflix series with too many plot lines into a neatly packaged box set. The social climate of the time was ripe for reform, too. The Byzantine Empire was on the brink of a new era, with growing cities, expanding trade networks, and an increasingly complex society. The people were ready for a legal system that made sense, one that wouldn't leave them in the dark ages when it came to knowing their rights and responsibilities. Justinian's reforms were about bringing the empire into a new chapter, one where the citizens could finally breathe a sigh of relief instead of a groan of frustration every time they had to deal with the law. In the end, Justinian's ambitions were driven by a mix of practicality and pride. He wanted to create a legal legacy that would outlast him, something that would be remembered long after the dust of his empire had settled. And as history would show, his efforts were nothing short of transformative. So, buckle up, because in the next part, we'll dive into the nitty-gritty of Justinian's legal overhaul, how he took the Byzantine Empire's legal system from a tangled mess to a streamlined masterpiece. And trust me, it's a story worth hearing. So, let's dive into the world of Justinian, the emperor who saw a tangled mess and thought, challenge accepted. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of legal reform, let's get to know the man behind the mission. Born in 482 AD in the modest surroundings of what is now North Macedonia, Justinian was the nephew of Justin I, who rose from humble origins to become emperor. Talk about family connections. But Justinian wasn't just riding his uncle's coattails. He was a sharp mind with a voracious appetite for learning, and he had a vision that would make Marie Kondo proud. Justinian's ambition was as boundless as the empire he inherited. He had this burning desire to restore the glory of Rome, albeit with a Byzantine twist. And what better way to do that than by tackling the empire's legal chaos? It wasn't just about tidying up. It was about legacy, power, and let's face it, the kind of ego trip that could rival any modern-day tech mogul's aspirations. Imagine trying to Marie Kondo the entire legal system of an empire that stretched across continents. This wasn't just decluttering your closet. This was decluttering a civilization. Enter Tribonian, the legal eagle of Justinian's dream team. Tribonian was the Yoda of Byzantine law, minus the cryptic syntax. He was a lawyer, judge, and the emperor's go-to guy for all things legal. His task, nothing short of Herculean. He was to take the sprawling mess of Roman laws, local customs, and imperial decrees, and condense them into something coherent, like turning a Jackson Pollock into a Rembrandt. This was no small feat. The legal system was a centuries-old hodgepodge, and simplifying it was akin to translating Shakespeare into text-speak without losing the poetry. The project was a massive undertaking, both in scope and cost. Think of it as the ancient world's version of a blockbuster movie, complete with a star-studded cast and a budget that could make a modern-day finance minister weep. The legal reform project began in 528 AD, just a year after Justinian ascended the throne. The stakes were high. A streamlined legal code would not only solidify Justinian's rule, but also provide a foundation for future governance. The timeline was ambitious, with the first major component, the Codex Justinianus, completed by 529 AD. This was a collection of past imperial constitutions, stripped of contradictions and redundancies, and it was just the beginning. The budget for this legal marvel, well, let's just say it wasn't cheap. In today's terms, we'd be talking millions. But Justinian wasn't one to pinch pennies when it came to his legacy. The financial outlay included salaries for Tribonian and his team of legal scholars and scribes, and the costs associated with assembling, reviewing, and rewriting the vast body of laws. It was an investment in the future of the empire, and Justinian was betting big. Now, it's worth noting that while Justinian's legal reforms were revolutionary, they weren't born out of purely altruistic motives. This was about power, centralizing it, and ensuring that everyone from the wealthiest senator to the poorest farmer knew exactly who was in charge. The Codex was more than a legal document. It was a tool of imperial control. Justinian was nothing if not pragmatic. He understood the power of law to unify and control a diverse empire. By creating a single legal code, he was not only simplifying governance, but also reinforcing his authority across the vast Byzantine lands. Tribonian and his team worked tirelessly, combing through centuries of legislation with the precision of a surgeon and the tenacity of a detective. Their task was to preserve the best of Roman law while discarding the outdated and the contradictory. It was a bit like trying to update your grandparents' old recipe for modern tastes while keeping the essence intact. The result was a comprehensive legal system that was both innovative and deeply rooted in the Roman tradition. But let's not romanticize it too much. The process was as grueling as it was groundbreaking. Imagine the countless hours spent hunched over scrolls, the heated debates over legal nuances, and the pressure of knowing that failure was not an option. Tribonian was the man with the plan, but he also had the emperor breathing down his neck, reminding him that the clock was ticking. The economic context of the time was another factor driving these reforms. The Byzantine Empire was a hub of trade and commerce, and a coherent legal system was essential for a thriving economy. Merchants, traders, and citizens needed clear rules to follow, contracts to rely on, and a justice system that wouldn't leave them in the lurch. Justinian's legal reforms were as much about economic stability as they were about political power. A unified legal code meant fewer disputes, quicker resolutions, and ultimately a more prosperous empire. The social climate also played a role. The empire was a melting pot of cultures, languages, and religions, and the legal system needed to reflect this diversity. Justinian's reforms aimed to create a sense of unity amidst the diversity, ensuring that all subjects, regardless of background, were governed by the same set of laws. It was a bold move, one that required both finesse and force. The legal code was not just a set of rules, it was a statement of imperial ideology, a testament to the enduring power of Roman law adapted for a new era. The Codex Justinianus was just the beginning. The legal team went on to produce the Digest, a massive compilation of legal opinions from Rome's greatest jurists, and the Institutes, a legal textbook for students and scholars. These works formed the backbone of what would become known as the Corpus Juris Civilis, or the body of civil law. This was Justinian's magnum opus, a legal legacy that would influence European law for centuries to come. It was a triumph of organization, a testament to the power of the written word to shape society. While Justinian's legal reforms were groundbreaking, they were not without controversy. Tribonian himself was a polarizing figure, accused of corruption and bribery by his contemporaries. Some saw him as a genius, others as a villain. But history is rarely black and white, and Tribonian's contributions to legal history are undeniable, even if his personal ethics were questionable. Here's the kicker. While the romantic notion of Justinian as a great legal reformer holds some truth, the reality is far more complex. Sure, he cleaned up the legal mess, but he also used the process to consolidate power and reinforce his authority. The legal reforms were as much about control as they were about clarity. They were a tool to unify the empire and cement Justinian's legacy, a testament to his ambition and vision. As we peel back the layers of Justinian's reforms, we see a man driven by both idealism and pragmatism. He was a visionary, but also a politician. His legal overhaul was a masterpiece of governance, but it was also a means of asserting imperial dominance. In the grand tapestry of history, Justinian's reforms stand out as a bold attempt to bring order to chaos, to transform a fragmented empire into a cohesive whole. In the end, Justinian's legal reforms were both a product of their time and a harbinger of things to come. They were a testament to the power of law to shape society, to bring order to chaos, and to transform the world. And while Justinian's empire would eventually crumble, his legal legacy endured, a reminder of the enduring power of the written word to shape history. But hold onto your hats, because there's more to this story, and the next chapter is just around the corner. The story of Justinian's legal reforms isn't just about dusting off old scrolls and tying them up in a neater package. No, it's about diving headfirst into the Byzantine Empire's messy attic and transforming chaos into clarity. And that's precisely what the Corpus Juris Civilis, or the body of civil law, was all about. Think of it as the original legal code for dummies, but with a bit more Latin and a lot more imperial authority. Let's unpack the Codex Justinianus first, the granddaddy of this legal legacy. Completed in 529 AD, this was the emperor's first big swing at legal reform. It gathered and organized over 1,000 years of imperial edicts from past Roman emperors. Imagine trying to fit all of Shakespeare's plays onto a single scroll, and you've got a sense of the scale here. The Codex was meant to be the go-to guide for any legal question in the empire, from how to handle a land dispute to what to do if someone filched your toga. It was a legal buffet, but with a strict no-leftovers policy. Any contradictory or outdated laws got the boot. Of course, the Codex wasn't perfect. It was more like a well-intentioned but occasionally clumsy attempt at legal tidying. Some edicts were still as clear as mud, and others, dare we say, a bit absurd. For example, there were rules about when a man could legally sell his children into slavery. A moral eyebrow-raiser today, but back then it was just Tuesday. The real kicker. While Justinian's goal was to simplify, the Codex itself was so dense that it made reading War and Peace seem like a light afternoon read. Next up, the Digest, or Pandex if you're feeling fancy. Picture this. A colossal 50-volume set of legal opinions from Rome's greatest minds, finished by 533 AD. This was Justinian's way of saying, hey, let's bring in the experts. The Digest was the legal equivalent of a greatest hits album, curating and compiling the wisdom of jurists like Ulpian and Papinian. It tackled everything from property law to criminal cases, and it was no mean feat to condense thousands of scrolls into something manageable. Tribonian and his team were like the ancient world's version of a rock band on tour, racing against time and expectations. They had just 3 years to complete this behemoth, working with the relentless efficiency of a caffeine-fueled college student facing finals. But like any good compilation, it had its share of misses. Some interpretations were outdated even for their time, and others were downright contradictory. Yet, despite its quirks, the Digest became the cornerstone of legal education in the Byzantine Empire. Then there's the Institutes, a sort of legal primer for students, crafted to educate the future Tribonians of the empire. Completed in 533 AD alongside the Digest, the Institutes were like the spark notes for Byzantine law, a straightforward introduction to the complex world of legal principles. It was divided into 4 books, covering topics like personhood, property, obligations, and more. While it sounds dry, it was revolutionary in its accessibility, making law more digestible for those who couldn't dedicate their lives to endless study. The institutes were intended to be a teaching tool, laying the groundwork for understanding the more complex Digest. It was Justinian's way of ensuring that the next generation of lawyers wouldn't be left scratching their heads over Byzantine legal spaghetti. And you know, to keep them from rewriting it all over again in a few decades. Finally, we have the novels, which were new laws enacted by Justinian himself after the original compilation of the Codex. They were essentially his legal updates, like software patches for a particularly buggy app. These novels were written in Greek, acknowledging the linguistic diversity of the empire and ensuring wider accessibility. They covered everything from inheritance laws to religious regulations, reflecting Justinian's ongoing tweaks to his legal masterpiece. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the myth of Justinian's legal perfection. While the Corpus Juris Civilis was groundbreaking, it wasn't quite the legal Eden some make it out to be. For starters, the challenge of translating centuries of Roman law into something coherent for a multicultural empire was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And despite the emperor's best efforts, the Byzantine Empire's legal system remained a bit of a patchwork quilt, with some regions applying the new laws more rigorously than others. The economic context of this massive legal overhaul cannot be understated. The Byzantine Empire was at the crossroads of trade between Europe, Asia, and Africa, and having a unified legal system was crucial for maintaining the flow of commerce. The Corpus Juris Civilis provided the framework for a stable economy, offering clear rules for contracts, trade disputes, and property rights. Yet, the cost of creating this legal leviathan was hefty. In today's terms, the project would have cost millions, a financial gamble that showed Justinian's willingness to invest in the empire's future. Politically, the Corpus Juris Civilis was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it centralized power, reinforcing Justinian's authority and unifying the empire under a single legal banner. On the other, it was a tool for controlling dissent and maintaining imperial dominance. The laws were as much about keeping the peace as they were about asserting control. A well-ordered legal system meant fewer excuses for rebellion, after all. Socially, Justinian's legal reforms attempted to address the empire's diversity, a mosaic of cultures, languages, and religions. The novels, in particular, were a nod to the Greek-speaking majority, illustrating the emperor's pragmatic approach to governance. Yet, the laws were also a reflection of their time, with social norms and values that might raise eyebrows today. For instance, some laws restricted the rights of women and reinforced social hierarchies, highlighting the tension between progress and tradition. So, where does this leave us in the grand scheme of things? Well, Justinian's legal reforms were both a triumph and a testament to the complexities of human governance. They were a bold attempt to bring order to chaos, to transform a sprawling empire into a well-oiled machine. But they were also a reminder that perfection is a moving target, one that even the most ambitious of emperors can't quite hit. Despite its imperfections, the Corpus Juris Civilis laid the groundwork for modern legal systems. Its influence stretched far beyond the Byzantine Empire, shaping European law for centuries to come. It was a legal legacy that outlasted the empire itself, a testament to the enduring power of Justinian's vision. But we're not done yet. The next chapter of this story will delve into the ripple effects of these reforms, exploring how they resonated through history and influenced the world as we know it. Stay tuned, because the legal drama is far from over. So, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of Justinian's legal reforms and their immediate impact on Byzantine society. Spoiler alert, it's not all sunshine and roses. While the Corpus Juris Civilis was a grand achievement, the reality on the ground was a bit more complicated. Imagine rolling out a brand new operating system only to find out half your users are still on dial-up. That's kind of what happened here. First, let's talk economics. The Byzantine Empire was like the world's busiest intersection, with trade routes crisscrossing from Europe to Asia. A unified legal system was supposed to be the traffic light that kept everything running smoothly. And in some ways, it did. Merchants finally had a set of clear rules to follow, which was great for business. Contracts became more reliable, and trade disputes got sorted faster than you can say, Silk Road. But, and there's always a but, the cost of implementing these reforms was a hefty burden on the imperial treasury. Justinian's legal overhaul wasn't exactly a budget-friendly endeavor. It was more like buying a high-end sports car when you're still paying off the family sedan. The political effects were a mixed bag as well. On one hand, the new legal code centralized power in a way that would make even the most iron-fisted ruler envious. Justinian was playing a game of chess, and the Corpus Juris Civilis was his queen, versatile, powerful, and capable of turning the tide. But here's the catch. Not everyone was thrilled about it. Local governors and officials, who were used to a bit of leeway in interpreting laws, suddenly found themselves tethered to the emperor's vision. Imagine being a regional manager suddenly micromanaged by a CEO with a penchant for detail. Not exactly a morale booster. Socially, the reforms aimed to create a sense of unity in a diverse empire. Did it work? Well, sort of. The laws certainly provided a framework for a more cohesive society, but they also highlighted the empire's internal contradictions. For example, the legal recognition of different religious communities was a step towards inclusivity, yet the enforcement was as inconsistent as a Wi-Fi signal in a medieval castle. And while the laws were meant to protect citizens' rights, they often reinforced existing social hierarchies. If you were a wealthy landowner, you probably slept a little easier at night. If you were a peasant, well, let's just say your dreams of upward mobility remained just that, dreams. Now, let's tackle the reception of these reforms. Was Justinian hailed as a hero, or did he face the wrath of a disgruntled populace? In reality, it was a bit of both. To the bureaucrats and legal scholars, Justinian was a visionary, the man who turned chaos into order. But to the average citizen, the reforms were more like a fancy new coat of paint on an old house. Nice to look at, but not exactly life-changing. The complexity of the new legal code was daunting, akin to trying to solve a Rubik's Cube without knowing the color scheme. Many found themselves more confused than ever, much like trying to navigate the Byzantine streets without a map. And then there was the emperor's PR problem. Justinian had a knack for making grand gestures, but his people's skills were about as subtle as a marching band at midnight. While he envisioned himself as a benevolent ruler, his subjects often saw him as a distant figure, more concerned with his legacy than their day-to-day struggles. The legal reforms were supposed to bridge that gap, but in the end, they sometimes felt more like a wall. So, was Justinian a genius, or just another emperor with a flair for the dramatic? The truth is somewhere in between. His reforms were groundbreaking, a testament to his ambition and vision. But they were also a reminder that even the most carefully laid plans can have unintended consequences. The legal code was a masterpiece of organization, yet it was also a tool of control, a way to consolidate power in an empire that was constantly teetering on the edge. In the grand scheme of things, Justinian's legal legacy was both a triumph and a cautionary tale. It showed the power of the written word to shape society, yet it also revealed the limitations of human governance. The emperor's dream of order was realized, but at a cost that would ripple through the empire for generations. And while the Corpus Juris Civilis would go on to influence legal systems across Europe, its immediate impact on Byzantine society was a mixed bag of progress and pitfalls. As we continue to unravel the story of Justinian's reforms, we'll see how these legal changes resonated through history, shaping the world in ways that even the emperor himself couldn't have imagined. But for now, let's leave the story open-ended, like a classic cliffhanger, ready for the next chapter in this Byzantine saga. So stay tuned, because the legal drama is far from over, and there's plenty more to explore in the world of Justinian and his grand ambitions. As we close the book on Justinian's grand legal adventure, let's take a step back and ponder the ripple effects of his reforms. I mean, we're talking about a Byzantine emperor whose legal legacy is still lurking in modern courtrooms like a historical ghost that refuses to be exorcised. It turns out, the Corpus Juris Civilis wasn't just a set of dusty old scrolls, but a legal blueprint that would shape the laws of nations far beyond its time and borders. First, let's cut through the romantic haze. Justinian isn't just some ancient figurehead whose reforms are enshrined in history textbooks. His vision was a bold experiment in governance, blending the best of Roman law with Byzantine flair. But was he a legal Moses, parting the sea of chaos with divine wisdom, or a savvy politician more interested in leaving his mark? Spoiler alert, it's a bit of both. While the emperor's ambitions were grand, they were also pragmatic. The Corpus Juris Civilis was a power play as much as a legal genius stroke, designed to unify a crumbling empire and assert imperial dominance. Fast forward a few centuries, and you find Justinian's legal code taking a European grand tour. In the medieval era, it became the go-to legal textbook for scholars in Bologna, the Harvard law of its day. By the 11th century, it was the foundation of the revived Roman law, and its principles seeped into the legal systems of Italy, Germany, and France. Think of it as the legal equivalent of a greatest hits album. Everyone wanted a piece of its timeless wisdom. This was when Europe, in its myriad kingdoms and duchies, started realizing the value of a coherent legal system, no more relying on the whims of local lords or the vagaries of oral tradition. Instead, Justinian's code offered a structured written law that could be cited, debated, and, crucially, trusted. Now, let's talk dollars and cents, or rather, ducats and denarii. Economically, Justinian's code laid the groundwork for a legal environment that could support burgeoning trade networks. Picture this. Merchants could now strike deals with a legal safety net, knowing that contracts were enforceable and disputes could be resolved without resorting to swords or scandalous duels. This legal stability was a cornerstone for the economic expansion that would eventually lead to the European Renaissance. So, while Justinian might not have invented the stock market, he certainly set the stage for it. Politically, the Byzantine model of centralized legal authority was a precursor to the modern state. By the time the Enlightenment rolled around, the ideas embedded in the Corpus Juris Civilis had morphed into the bedrock of civil law traditions in Europe. It was like a legal baton passed through the ages, from the Holy Roman Empire to the Napoleonic Code. Even today, countries like France, Germany, and many others owe a nod to Justinian every time they draft a new law. The emperor's vision of a unified legal system has become a staple of modern governance, a testament to the enduring power of a good idea. Socially, Justinian's reforms were a double-edged sword. Sure, they provided a framework for a more cohesive society, but they also reinforced the status quo. Women, for instance, found their legal rights limited in ways that would make a modern-day feminist cringe. Inheritance laws often favored male heirs, and legal decisions frequently upheld existing social hierarchies. So much for progressive reform, right? Yet, the mere fact that these laws were documented meant they could be challenged, and eventually changed. It was a small step on the long road to equality, but a step nonetheless. But let's not sugarcoat it. The myth of Justinian as a legal savior glosses over some gritty realities. The emperor's reforms were as much about control as they were about clarity. By centralizing the legal system, Justinian reinforced his grip on power, ensuring that even the most remote provinces danced to the imperial tune. It was a masterstroke of political maneuvering, but one that came at a cost. The Byzantine Empire might have gained a legal legacy, but it also inherited a centralized bureaucracy that sometimes stifled local governance and innovation. So, what do we make of Justinian's legal saga in the grand tapestry of history? Was it a visionary triumph, or a band-aid on a bullet wound? Perhaps a bit of both. Justinian's legal reforms were a bold attempt to impose order on chaos, transform a fragmented empire into a unified whole. But they were also a reminder that even the most well-intentioned reforms can have unintended consequences. The emperor's dream of a cohesive legal system was realized, but it also exposed the limitations of centralized power in a diverse empire. In the end, Justinian's legal legacy is a testament to the enduring power of the written word to shape society. It's a reminder that laws are more than just rules. They're the scaffolding upon which civilizations are built. And while the Byzantine Empire eventually crumbled, its legal achievements lived on, influencing legal systems across the globe. From the corridors of the European Union to the courtrooms of South America, the echoes of Justinian's reforms can still be heard today. So, as you drift off to sleep, ponder this. The next time you sign a contract, debate a legal point, or simply marvel at the intricacies of modern law, remember that a Byzantine emperor with a penchant for power and a love of order had a hand in shaping the world we live in. Justinian's legacy is more than just a set of ancient laws. It's a story of ambition, innovation, and the timeless quest for justice. And while the emperor himself may have faded into the annals of history, his influence endures, a testament to the enduring power of a visionary idea. If you had a time machine and a penchant for unlikely success stories, the dusty roads of 15th century Castile would be a prime destination. There you'd find young Isabella, a princess who, despite being far from the throne, was on a trajectory that would make even the most ambitious Game of Thrones character blush. Born in 1451 in Madrigal de las Altas Torres, Isabella was the daughter of John Roman II of Castile and Isabella of Portugal. Now, Castile wasn't exactly the powerhouse of medieval Europe. It was more like the middle child of kingdoms, often overlooked and itching for a taste of the spotlight. Here's the twist. Isabella wasn't even supposed to be queen. Her older half-brother, Henry Roman IV, was the reigning king. And let's just say his nickname, Henry the Impotent, wasn't exactly the PR move you'd want. He was more interested in falconry than leadership, and his reign was marked by chaos and infighting. But if the royal family tree taught us anything, it's that dynastic squabbles and power vacuums are the perfect breeding grounds for unlikely heroes. Isabella's journey to power was less about destiny and more about strategic maneuvering. Picture a chess game where the queen piece starts way off the board but somehow ends up in checkmate position. When her brother Alfonso died in 1468, Isabella became the most viable heir, and that's when the political maneuvering kicked into high gear. Forget about Disney princesses waiting for their prince. This was a woman who knew how to play the political game. Enter Ferdinand of Aragon, a man whose name sounds like he could be a character in a Spanish soap opera. Ferdinand was dashing, politically savvy, and most importantly, he came with a kingdom of his own. Their marriage in 1469 was less about romance and more akin to a corporate merger. They were the medieval power couple, each bringing assets to the table in a partnership that would eventually unite Spain. Forget romantic candlelit dinners. These two were plotting the future over strategy sessions. Their wedding wasn't the stuff of fairy tales either. First off, Isabella had to outsmart her own half-brother, Henry Roman IV, who had other matrimonial plans for her. She swerved his choice of a suitor by marrying Ferdinand in secret at the Palacio de los Vivero in Valladolid. It was a stealth operation, with Isabella donning a dress that was probably more about practicality than poofiness. They even had to get papal dispensation because, plot twist, they were second cousins. Nothing screams romance like a papal sanction, right? What really set Isabella apart was her vision. She was determined to turn Castile and Aragon into a formidable power. Together, she and Ferdinand implemented reforms that strengthened the monarchy, reduced the power of the nobility, and set the stage for Spain to become a global player. But let's not get too misty-eyed. Their union had less to do with love and more with mutual respect and ambition. They were two sides of the same coin, each knowing that alone they could accomplish much, but together they could achieve greatness. This was a royal alliance that transformed the political landscape of Europe, with a dash of intrigue and a hefty dose of power play. In the end, Isabella's rise from a forgotten princess to a queen who shaped history was anything but a fairy tale. It was a testament to her strategic brilliance and her ability to navigate the treacherous waters of 15th century politics. She wasn't just a pawn in someone else's game. She was the one setting the board. And that, my friends, is how you redefine the rules of medieval monarchy. So, speaking of game boards and strategic brilliance, let's dive into the grand chess match that was the Reconquista, a campaign that would make even the most seasoned general sweat. Isabella's role in this epic saga of reclaiming Spain from the Moors wasn't just a side hustle. It was her full-time gig, and then some. Picture this, a campaign spanning nearly 8 centuries, thousands of battles, and a staggering number of lives. The Moors had been in control of parts of the Iberian Peninsula since 711 AD, and by the time Isabella came onto the scene in the late 15th century, it was about time someone flipped the script. Here's the lowdown. The Reconquista was as much a financial marathon as it was a military one. Wars, as you might have guessed, aren't exactly cheap. Think of it as the medieval version of funding a blockbuster movie, only instead of CGI dragons, you had real swords, horses, and armies to pay for. The annual cost of keeping an army in the field was astronomical, and Isabella was essentially the CFO of this entire enterprise. Estimates suggest the war effort cost around 200 million maravedis each year. For context, 1 maravedi was enough to buy about 2 chickens back then. So, we're talking about enough money to stock a medieval KFC for years. But dear listener, how did Isabella manage to keep the coffers stocked? The answer is a delightful cocktail of savvy taxation, strategic marriages, and a smidge of royal arm twisting. She restructured the Castilian economy, establishing a system where the royal treasury had a steady flow of income from various taxes. She even convinced the Catholic Church to chip in, no small feat, given that the Church wasn't exactly known for charitable donations to secular causes. Isabella's ability to keep the money flowing was nothing short of miraculous, and some might say she was the original spin doctor, turning religious fervor into a viable revenue stream. This brings us to the knotty matter of Isabella's morality play. On the one hand, she was deeply pious, a queen who spent countless hours in prayer and was devoted to her faith. On the other hand, she had no qualms about using her religious devotion as a tool for political gain. Isabella's piety was like an all-access pass to the spiritual high ground, allowing her to frame the Reconquista as not just a political or military campaign, but a holy crusade. This was a war with divine backing, folks, and Isabella was determined to cast herself as God's very own warrior queen. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. Isabella's religious zealotry was a double-edged sword. While it galvanized her forces and painted the Moors as the ultimate other, in a narrative that would make any propagandist proud, it also laid the groundwork for one of history's darkest chapters, the Spanish Inquisition. Yep, the very institution that would make even the toughest inquisitors in Monty Python's sketch seem like amateurs. Isabella's vision of a unified Christian Spain came with a hefty price tag: the persecution of Jews, Muslims, and anyone else who dared to subscribe to a different belief system. But before we get too far ahead, let's focus on the Reconquista's climax, the Siege of Granada in 1492. This was the final showdown, the grand finale in a series of battles that had lasted for centuries. The siege itself was a grueling affair, lasting for 8 months and stretching the resources of both the Moors and the Castilian forces to their limits. But our leading lady, Isabella, ever the strategist, managed to keep her troops supplied and motivated. It didn't hurt that she was right there on the battlefield, dressed in armor and ready to lead by example. It was a triumphant display of leadership that would make any CEO proud. Granada finally surrendered on January 2, 1492, marking the end of Moorish rule in Spain and the beginning of a new era under Isabella and Ferdinand. It was a moment of triumph, a culmination of years of strategic planning, military might, and let's face it, a fair bit of stubborn determination. But even in victory, the human cost was staggering. Countless lives lost, families torn apart, and entire communities displaced. The romantic notion of a holy war gave way to the harsh reality of its aftermath. Yet, Isabella's legacy from the Reconquista is a complex tapestry of triumphs and tragedies. Her ability to blend piety with political savvy, to fund a seemingly endless war, and to emerge victorious as the architect of a unified Spain is nothing short of remarkable. But her story is also a cautionary tale of how religious zeal, when wielded as a weapon, can lead to dark and devastating consequences. As we pause here, let's remember that history is a living, breathing thing, full of contradictions, complexities, and lessons that still resonate today. Isabella, like all historical figures, was neither wholly a hero nor a villain. She was a woman of her time, navigating the treacherous waters of medieval politics and warfare with a mix of ambition, faith, and fire. Stay with us as we continue to unravel the layers of her legacy and the subsequent chapters that would shape the world as we know it. And speaking of reshaping the world, let's talk about Isabella's next big move, backing a certain Genos explorer who promised to sail west and find a new route to the East Indies. Now, if you think that sounds like the setup for a bad joke, you're not alone. Columbus pitching his grand idea to the Spanish court was akin to someone today proposing to mine asteroids for gold. Sounds a bit out there, right? But Queen Isabella, ever the visionary, saw something in Columbus's plan. Spoiler alert, it wasn't just about spices and silk. Here's the scoop. By the late 15th century, the economic landscape was all about those lucrative trade routes. Europe had an insatiable appetite for exotic goods like spices, silk, and precious metals, and the traditional overland routes were increasingly risky and controlled by unfriendly powers. Columbus promised to bypass all that by sailing west. But let's debunk a popular myth. Isabella wasn't exactly swooning over the idea of cinnamon and cloves. What really caught her attention? The potential for spreading Christianity and expanding her realm's influence. Think of it as the medieval version of increasing your social media footprint, only with more swords and ships. Now, before you imagine Columbus as the lone dreamer with a map and a prayer, let's remember he was initially turned down, repeatedly. Both Portugal and Spain took one look at his calculations and said, "Nah, we'll pass." And honestly, who could blame them? Columbus's math was shakier than a Jenga tower in an earthquake. He underestimated the Earth's circumference by about a third, which is the kind of error that makes you wonder if he was using a map or a child's drawing of the world. But Isabella, she was willing to bet against the odds. In 1492, she decided to roll the dice, granting Columbus the ships, crew, and funding he needed, all while keeping a tight grip on the purse strings. Here's a fun fact. To finance this little nautical adventure, Isabella didn't just dig into the royal coffers. Nope, she pawned her own jewels to make it happen. Or at least, that's the romanticized version. In reality, the funds came from a mix of sources, including a loan from a royal treasurer. But hey, the jewel story makes for better drama, and who doesn't love a bit of bling in their history? Columbus set sail on August 3, 1492, with 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. He was armed with a royal decree and a healthy dose of optimism, because let's face it, you'd need it to cross an ocean with little more than a prayer and a promise. It took him 36 days to reach the Bahamas, a journey that changed the course of history, but wasn't exactly the instant jackpot he'd hoped for. No golden cities or lavish palaces awaited him, just palm trees and Taino villagers who were probably wondering what on earth these strange newcomers were doing on their shores. The economic impact of Columbus's voyage was a mixed bag. On one hand, it opened the floodgates for European exploration and exploitation of the Americas, ushering in a new era of wealth and trade. We're talking about a gold rush that would make the California 49ers look like amateurs. The influx of silver from the New World would eventually bankroll Spain's golden age, making it the envy of Europe. On the other hand, it unleashed a Pandora's box of consequences. Indigenous populations were decimated by disease, warfare, and enslavement, turning what could have been a cultural exchange into a catastrophic collision. And politically, Isabella's gamble paid off in spades, at least initially. Spain emerged as a dominant global power, its flag planted on vast new lands. But as with all great power plays, the success came with strings attached. The newly discovered territories sparked a mad scramble among European powers, leading to centuries of colonial competition and conflict. It was like a global game of risk, only with real bloodshed and real lives at stake. Columbus himself made 4 voyages in total, each more disappointing than the last in terms of the riches he found. By his final return to Spain, his reputation had taken a hit, and he was embroiled in controversies over his governance of the new territories. Let's just say the honeymoon period didn't last, and Columbus found himself more of a pariah than a hero by the end. Yet, Isabella's decision to back Columbus remains one of history's most audacious acts of sponsorship. It was a leap of faith that redefined the known world and cemented her legacy as a queen who wasn't afraid to gamble in the grandest way possible. But like any good story, this one had its fair share of turmoil and triumph, setting the stage for the complex and often contentious history of the Americas. So, dear listeners, as we sail through this tale of exploration, ambition, and unintended consequences, remember that history is a tapestry woven with bold moves, unexpected turns, and the indelible mark of human ambition. Isabella may have opened the door to a new world, but what lay beyond it was a mixture of promise and peril, a testament to the enduring complexity of the human story. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the ripples of her reign and the legacies that followed in the wake of her bold decisions. But Isabella's adventures weren't just about swashbuckling across the Atlantic or funding the grand tour of a certain Genoese sailor. Back home in Castile, Isabella was busy untangling a different kind of knot, the messy ball of yarn that was her kingdom's domestic policy. If Columbus was her wild card, then reforming Castile was a strategic long game, one that involved turning a patchwork quilt of medieval chaos into a streamlined powerhouse. Let's start with the nuts and bolts. By 1474, when Isabella took the throne, Castile was about as organized as a teenager's sock drawer. The nobility had a habit of treating the kingdom like their personal playground, complete with private armies and a penchant for rebellion. Isabella, ever the savvy strategist, understood that to centralize power, she needed to curb these overzealous lords. Her move, the Consiglio Real, a council that she and Ferdinand restructured to include trusted advisors over powerful magnates. It was less about who had the biggest sword and more about who had the queen's ear. This council was the medieval equivalent of a board of directors, making sure the royal edicts didn't just gather dust on a shelf. Isabella didn't stop there. She also went after the far-from-saintly cities and towns that had become fiefdoms unto themselves. Enter the corregidors royal officials sent to enforce the crown's will and keep an eye on local governance. Think of them as the royal babysitters, making sure the local kids didn't burn the house down when mom and dad weren't looking. By 1480, these officials were stationed in every major town, ensuring that Isabella's policies were more than just ink on parchment. But reforming a kingdom wasn't just about playing political chess. Isabella had a knack for legal reforms that would have made even the most seasoned attorney nod in approval. In 1480, she and Ferdinand launched the Ordinances of Medina del Campo, which overhauled the legal system. These laws standardized weights and measures, simplified commercial transactions, and importantly, established a set of guidelines that merchants could actually understand. It was like giving the legal world a much-needed spring cleaning, one that cleared out the cobwebs of medieval ambiguity. Now, let's chat about the Spanish economy, an entity that Isabella treated with the same meticulous care as her royal wardrobe. The medieval economy wasn't exactly humming like a well-oiled machine. It was more akin to a horse-drawn cart with a wonky wheel. Isabella's solution was to create a more predictable tax system. She implemented the alcabala asterisk, a sales tax that was as unpopular as you might expect, but it was effective in filling the royal coffers. This tax was a flat 10% on sales, which meant Isabella was getting her cut every time someone bought, sold, or traded so much as a loaf of bread. Isabella also had the foresight to tap into the burgeoning wool trade. Spain's merino sheep were the fluffiest gold mines of the era, and their wool was in high demand across Europe. By regulating the Mesta, a powerful sheep farmers' guild, Isabella ensured that the crown got a slice of the profits every time someone decided they needed a new cloak or tapestry. It was a move that turned Spain into a textile titan of the late 15th century, and it kept the coin flowing for all those pricey overseas escapades. Balancing the books was no small feat, especially when you consider that Isabella was also bankrolling the Reconquista and Columbus's voyages. But here's where her genius shone through. She managed to juggle these expenses by squeezing every Maravdi out of her kingdom without causing a full-scale revolt. She cut out the middlemen, reigned in corruption, and made sure that the crown was the ultimate authority on financial matters. It was like watching a master chef balance a dozen plates, each one spinning precariously, yet never toppling over. Isabella's domestic policies were more than just a means to an end. They laid the groundwork for Spain's future as a global heavyweight. By centralizing power and stabilizing the economy, she set the stage for the Habsburg dynasty to take Spain to new heights in the 16th century. Her reign was the prelude to Spain becoming the empire on which the sun never set, a title that would echo through the annals of history. Yet in the annals of history, every silver lining has its cloud. Isabella's reforms, while groundbreaking, were not without consequence. The concentration of power in the monarchy's hands came at the expense of regional autonomy, a tension that would simmer and occasionally boil over in the years to come. Her financial acumen, while impressive, also laid the groundwork for future fiscal challenges. The debt incurred from her ambitious policies and projects would hang over Spain like a storm cloud, one that her successors would have to contend with. But let's not forget the human cost. Isabella's rule was marked by her fervent belief in religious unity, which led to the persecution and expulsion of Jews and Muslims in 1492, a decision that tore apart communities and drained the economy of talented and skilled individuals. While her vision of a unified Christian Spain was realized, it came with a price tag that included cultural homogenization and the loss of diversity, a richness that had long been a hallmark of Iberian society. As we reflect on Isabella's domestic policies, it's clear that her legacy is a tapestry of triumphs and trials. She was a queen who wielded power with a deft hand, reshaping Castilian society through a blend of legal reform, economic savvy, and political acumen. Her reign was a balancing act of ambition and pragmatism, a dance on the knife's edge of medieval politics. And while she may not have been perfect, who among us is? Her impact on Spain and the world was profound and lasting. As we prepare to dive into the final chapter of Isabella's reign, let's keep in mind that the story of history's greats is never black and white. It's a spectrum of nuances, a kaleidoscope of motivations, decisions, and consequences. Stay with us as we continue to unravel the threads of Isabella's legacy, a legacy that continues to intrigue, inspire, and challenge us to this day. As we continue to unravel the threads of Isabella's legacy, let's dive into the complex tapestry that showcases her as both a unifier and a divider. Picture a queen who managed to stitch together a kingdom out of a patchwork quilt of squabbling nobles, rebellious cities, and religious factions, only to embroider it with policies that would fray the edges for centuries to come. Now that's a legacy with layers. Isabella of Castile is often celebrated as the monarch who brought Spain together, but let's not put away the party poppers just yet. Her unification of Spain was like pulling off the ultimate high-wire act, impressive but perilous. Yes, she and Ferdinand managed to unite Castile and Aragon into a burgeoning powerhouse, yet this union was as much about realpolitik as it was about romance. Their marriage was the medieval equivalent of a corporate merger, complete with synergistic strategies and a shared vision. But the reality was, Isabella's Spain was a land of contrasts, a nation striving for unity while also sowing seeds of division. Take the Spanish Inquisition, for instance. It was an institution born from Isabella's fervent desire for religious homogeneity. The Inquisition wasn't just a tool of religious conformity. It was a political weapon, a medieval big brother keeping tabs on who was singing from the same hymn sheet. Estimates suggest that about 150,000 people were prosecuted, with thousands executed. It's the kind of legacy that makes one wonder if unity was achieved at the expense of humanity. The Inquisition cast a long shadow, one that tarnished the bright glow of Spain's newfound unity. It's a legacy that illustrates how the road to hell is often paved with good intentions, or at least, with intentions that seem good at first glance. Let's not forget Isabella's role in the expulsion of Jews in 1492, an act that stripped Spain of a vibrant and integral community. Over 200,000 Jews were forced to leave, taking with them skills, knowledge, and connections that had enriched Iberian society. This decision was less about religious purity and more about economic and political control. Isabella's Spain was a land where conformity was king, and anything that threatened the status quo was shown the door. The myth of Isabella as a saintly queen, champion of Catholicism, glosses over these harsher realities. In truth, her reign was marked by a complex interplay of faith and fear, ambition and anxiety. And speaking of myths, let's tackle the romanticized image of Isabella as a benevolent ruler with a heart of gold. Sure, she was pious and visionary, but she was also a shrewd operator. Her sponsorship of Columbus wasn't purely for the glory of God or the thrill of exploration. It was a calculated risk, a high-stakes gamble to outmaneuver European rivals and secure a piece of the lucrative spice trade. The Columbus voyages were less about discovering a new world and more about establishing a new economic order. Isabella's legacy here is a mixed bag of triumph and tragedy, opening the door to exploration while also unleashing a Pandora's box of colonization. Isabella's reign didn't just set Spain on a path to glory, it also paved the way for infamy. Her policies laid the groundwork for Spain's golden age, a period of unprecedented wealth and power. But like any gilded age, there was a catch. The influx of gold and silver from the Americas led to rampant inflation, a phenomenon known as the price revolution. The very success that Isabella helped engineer sowed the seeds of future economic instability. It's a classic case of be careful what you wish for, as the wealth that filled the royal coffers also threatened to bust them wide open. As we ponder Isabella's ambitious vision, it's clear that her legacy is a study in contradictions. She was a queen who dreamed of a unified, powerful Spain, but whose methods sometimes divided more than they united. Her reign was a balancing act of light and shadow, ambition and consequence. It's a legacy that tells us something profound about the nature of power and the human condition. For every step forward, there were costs, both seen and unseen, that rippled through history like stones cast into a pond. In the end, Isabella's story is one of both inspiration and caution. She was a woman who defied the expectations of her time, reshaping the world with a blend of piety, pragmatism, and political acumen. Yet, her legacy serves as a reminder that history's great figures are as much architects of their own myths as they are of their empires. As we close the book on Isabella of Castile, let's remember that the stories we tell about the past are as complex and contradictory as the people who lived them. History, much like Isabella's reign, is a tapestry of triumphs and trials, woven together by the threads of human ambition and the relentless march of time. In the grand theater of South American history, few players have commanded the stage with quite the same flair as Simon Bolivar. Born in the year 1783 in Caracas, Venezuela, Bolivar entered the world with a silver spoon so large it might as well have been a shovel. His family, rolling in wealth from their sprawling estates and lucrative mines, was basically the 18th century equivalent of the Rockefellers. But money wasn't the only thing that shaped Bolivar's early life. Oh no, this was a young man who had a taste for drama and a knack for being in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place, depending on your perspective. Let's start with his aristocratic upbringing. Bolivar was a bona fide member of the Venezuelan elite, a kid who probably never had to clean his room or worry about whether there was enough food on the table. His family's estates spanned a generous portion of the countryside, after all. But don't be too quick to roll your eyes at yet another rich kid with too much time on his hands. Bolivar's early life wasn't all privilege and leisure. He lost both his parents by the age of 9, which is enough to make any kid grow up quickly, albeit in a mansion. With a bank account as deep as the Mariana Trench, Bolivar was shipped off to Europe for a proper education. And by proper, I mean he was exposed to the Enlightenment, a whirlwind of ideas about liberty, equality, and fraternity that were shaking the very foundations of the old world. Picture a young Simon Bolivar wandering the cobblestone streets of Paris, soaking up the revolutionary vibes like a sponge. While most of us would have come back with a few souvenirs and maybe a beret, Bolivar returned with a head full of revolutionary ideas and an itch to change the world. But let's talk about his flair for the dramatic. Bolivar wasn't just about reading Rousseau and Voltaire. He was about making grand gestures. Take, for instance, his speeches. Bolivar could talk the hind leg off a donkey, his words full of passion and fire. He was the kind of guy who could make a grocery list sound like a call to arms. His speeches were legendary, not just for their content, but for their theatrical delivery. He once famously declared, "If nature opposes us, we will fight her and make her obey." Now that's the kind of energy you bring when you're ready to take on an empire. Speaking of nature, let's not forget the great earthquake of 1812. Here's the scene. Bolivar, fresh-faced and eager, was rallying his troops, trying to ignite the fires of revolution in Venezuela. Then, out of nowhere, the ground shook with such ferocity that it felt like the earth itself was trying to spit everyone out. In true Bolivar fashion, he declared the quake was divine retribution against the Spanish crown. Bold move, right? Except the quake also managed to flatten his supporters' homes. Talk about a divine backfire. But Bolivar, ever the optimist, spun it as a sign that their cause was righteous, even if it did mean starting from rubble. Bolivar's introduction to warfare was less a baptism by fire and more a baptism by, well, trial and error. His early military campaigns were about as successful as trying to herd cats. The young general had a shaky start, with more defeats than victories. But Bolivar had something other than strategy up his sleeve: charisma. He could rally troops with his words, even when his tactics left something to be desired. It was like watching a motivational speaker who occasionally forgot their notes. Despite the setbacks and seismic interruptions, Bolivar's vision for a liberated South America didn't waver. He was like that one friend who's convinced they can start a successful band despite not knowing how to play an instrument. His dreams were larger than life, and his determination was as unyielding as the Andes Mountains he would let across with his army. The man had a penchant for bold moves and grand visions, and if that meant a few stumbles along the way, so be it. And so, Bolivar set out on his path to become the Liberator, a title that would eventually be etched into history, even if it took a few missteps and Mother Nature's not-so-subtle hints to get there. But that's the beauty of Bolivar's story. It's a mix of triumph and folly, of grand speeches and ground-trembling miscalculations, all wrapped up in the colorful tapestry of South America's fight for independence. Stay tuned as this tale unfolds with all its twists, turns, and tremors. As the dust settled from Bolivar's early misadventures, he found himself at a crossroads. His military campaigns had the rhythm of a yo-yo, up one moment, down the next. Early on, his battle tactics often seemed like they were drawn from a manual for creative chaos. The man was audacious, no doubt, but sometimes that audacity was akin to bringing a sword to a cannon fight. Yet, if Bolivar was anything, he was persistent. The setbacks only seemed to fuel the fire in his belly, and he had a knack for bouncing back with a vengeance. Battle of Carabobo in 1821 was a turning point, a masterpiece in military strategy that finally put Bolivar's name in lights, not for blunders, but for brilliance. Up until then, his campaigns had felt like a series of unfortunate events, but Carabobo changed the narrative. Here, Bolivar showcased a strategic genius that gave him the edge he desperately needed. On June 24, 1821, he orchestrated a decisive victory against the Spanish forces, and it wasn't just luck. He had learned from past mistakes and assembled a formidable 500-strong force, carefully balancing local recruits and seasoned veterans. The battle itself was a symphony of tactical maneuvers. Bolivar positioned his troops to exploit the terrain, using the cover of the dense Venezuelan landscape to his advantage. It wasn't just about brute force, it was about cunning. Bolivar's forces outflanked the Spanish, and in a matter of hours, the battlefield was his. The Spanish lost about 2,000 men, while Bolivar's casualties were significantly lower, a testament to his growing prowess as a tactician. But let's not get too carried away with the fairy tale of Carabobo. For every glorious victory, there were countless logistical nightmares lurking in the shadows. Bolivar's army often marched on little more than sheer willpower, with supplies as scarce as water in a desert. Shoestring budgets didn't cover new boots, let alone ammunition and provisions. His troops faced hunger, disease, and the relentless elements. And then there was the Andes. Ah, the Andes, those majestic mountains that Bolivar decided to cross. It was the kind of decision that would have made Hannibal raise an eyebrow and perhaps mutter, "Good luck with that." Crossing the Andes was less of a military maneuver and more of a test of human endurance. Picture this: thousands of men, accompanied by a few mules, traversing treacherous paths at altitudes that would make your head spin. And did I mention they were doing this with next to nothing in terms of supplies? They faced snow, altitude sickness, and the ever-present threat of death, all for the promise of liberty. It was the ultimate gamble, and Bolivar was all in. Back on the battlefield, Bolivar's speeches remained as fiery as ever. He had a gift for rallying the troops, even when reality was less than inspiring. He'd stand before his men, painting vivid pictures of freedom and glory, conveniently glossing over the logistical quagmires they faced. It's like he had this magical ability to make even the direst circumstances sound like a stepping stone to greatness. But as inspiring as his words were, they didn't always account for the pesky details, like the fact that rainy season in South America wasn't just a mild inconvenience. It was more like Mother Nature's reminder that she had a wicked sense of humor. Despite these challenges, Bolivar's charisma was like a magnet, drawing in support from those who believed in his vision. He had this uncanny ability to unite disparate factions under the banner of independence. Whether it was through sheer force of will or his magnetic personality, Bolivar managed to keep his coalition together, even when the odds were stacked against them. Economically, the situation was a juggling act on a tightrope. Funding an army with limited resources was no small feat. Bolivar's campaigns often relied on the goodwill of local populations and the occasional, shall we say, creative requisitioning of supplies. But even with these measures, the coffers were constantly on the brink of emptiness. It was a testament to Bolivar's leadership that he managed to stretch every peso to its breaking point and still keep his army moving forward. Politically, Bolivar had to navigate a labyrinth of allegiances and rivalries. The fight for independence was a complex web of interests, with various factions jockeying for power. Bolivar's vision for a unified South America was ambitious, to say the least, and not everyone was on board. Yet, through diplomacy and sheer tenacity, he managed to hold the fractious coalition together, at least for the time being. In the grand scheme of things, Bolivar's journey was far from over. Carabobo was a victory, but it was just one chapter in a much larger story. The road ahead was fraught with challenges, both on and off the battlefield. As Bolivar continued his quest to liberate South America, he would face new trials, new battles, and new opportunities to prove that he was more than just a man with a dream. He was El Libertador, with a destiny to fulfill. As the echoes of Carabobo's victory faded, Simon Bolivar discovered that winning battles was only half the tango. The other half, holding together a newly liberated land that was as cohesive as a herd of cats on a hot tin roof. Bolivar's grand vision was to forge a united South America, akin to the United States, but with a spicy Latin twist. Enter Gran Colombia, a bold experiment in regional unity encompassing modern-day Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama. It was the kind of ambitious plan that made you wonder if Bolivar was a visionary or just plain loco. But here's the rub. Gran Colombia was a bit like a potluck dinner where everyone brings their own dish, but refuses to share. Regional jealousy and local interests simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. Bolivar, ever the optimist, assumed his charisma could bridge these divides, but reality had other plans. The regional leaders were less concerned with continental unity and more preoccupied with their own power bases. It was like trying to teach a pack of alpha dogs to play nice when everyone's vying for the same bone. Bolivar's political maneuvering was as intricate as a game of chess, though sometimes he seemed to be playing checkers. His authoritarian tendencies, often brushed aside in the grand narratives, were a double-edged sword. On one hand, they allowed him to enact sweeping changes, like the 1821 Constitution of Cucuta, which aimed to centralize power and streamline governance. On the other hand, these same tendencies alienated local leaders who weren't thrilled about ceding authority to a central government. It was the classic tale of too much too soon, and Bolivar was caught in the middle, balancing on the tightrope of his own making. This wasn't just a political soap opera. It had real implications for economic stability. Gran Colombia's economy was about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Bolivar's dream of a vibrant, cohesive economic unit was hampered by regional disparities. Venezuela, rich in resources but lacking infrastructure, was like an overstuffed Christmas stocking with no way to distribute the goodies. Meanwhile, Colombia was trying to dig itself out of a fiscal hole with a spoon. Income from exports like cocoa and coffee was supposed to be the lifeline, but getting goods to market involved navigating treacherous terrain and bureaucratic red tape that could make even the most patient saint lose their cool. Then there was the issue of currency. Gran Colombia was supposed to operate under a unified economic system, but in practice it was more of a patchwork quilt of local currencies, each as volatile as the next. Bolivar's attempts to introduce a unified currency were about as successful as convincing cats to swim. The peso fuerte was meant to be the linchpin of this economic vision, but rampant inflation and lack of public trust turned it into little more than a novelty item. Now, let's talk about Bolivar's leadership style, which was less of a democratic dream and more of a benevolent dictatorship. The myth of Bolivar as an untouchable hero conveniently glosses over his penchant for ruling with an iron fist. His proclamations and constitutions often ignored the gritty realities on the ground. For Bolivar, local governance was a secondary concern, something to be dealt with after the grand tapestry of his vision was complete. But the devil, as they say, is in the details. The local realities, cultural differences, economic needs, and political aspirations were like loose threads that threatened to unravel the whole thing. Despite these challenges, Bolivar's charisma remained his ace in the hole. He had an uncanny ability to inspire devotion, even when his policies were as popular as a skunk at a garden party. His speeches were legendary, full of fire and brimstone, capable of rallying both troops and politicians alike. It was his gift for oratory that kept the dream of Gran Colombia alive, at least for a while. But even the most eloquent speeches couldn't paper over the cracks forever. As Bolivar navigated the turbulent waters of political infighting, he found himself increasingly isolated. The regional leaders, who had once hailed him as El Libertador, began to see him as an outsider imposing his will. Bolivar's insistence on central authority clashed with the local leaders' desire for autonomy. It was a classic power struggle, with Bolivar caught in the crossfire, trying to hold together a fragile coalition that was fraying at the edges. Bolivar's story is often romanticized, casting him as the noble hero fighting against insurmountable odds. And while there's truth to that narrative, it's only part of the story. The reality is messier, full of contradictions and complexities. Bolivar was a man of his time, shaped by his experiences and driven by his vision. But he was also a man whose authoritarian tendencies and disregard for local conditions created a legacy that's as contentious as it is celebrated. In the end, Bolivar's dream of a united South America was like trying to hold water in a sieve. The forces of regionalism, economic disparity, and political infighting were too powerful to overcome. Gran Colombia, once the shining beacon of continental unity, began to fracture under the weight of its own contradictions. Bolivar's vision, though grand, was ultimately a victim of the harsh realities of the world he sought to change. As the story of Simon Bolivar continues to unfold, it's clear that his legacy is as complex as the man himself. The untouchable hero myth may have its allure, but the reality of his contentious leadership style is a reminder that history is never as simple as it seems. Bolivar's journey is far from over, and the challenges he faced in trying to hold together a newly liberated South America offer valuable lessons for anyone with a dream of uniting disparate peoples under a single banner. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of El Libertador, a man whose vision and reality were forever at odds. While Simon Bolivar was busy trying to stitch together the patchwork quilt of Gran Colombia, the threads were already unraveling at an alarming rate. His dream of a united South America was increasingly looking like a bad episode of a reality show, full of dramatic confrontations, unexpected betrayals, and a lot of unresolved tension. And while Bolivar might have been the star of this historical soap opera, his health was quickly stealing the spotlight. You see, by the late 1820s, Bolivar wasn't just battling political upheaval. His own body was staging a rebellion. Tuberculosis, the 19th century's not-so-silent killer, was slowly sapping his strength. It was a cruel irony that a man known for his boundless energy and dynamism was being gradually worn down by an illness that left him as feeble as a kitten. This wasn't the gallant hero of legend charging into battle. This was a man coughing up blood and struggling to maintain the iron grip on a fracturing coalition. Now, let's talk about Bolivar's resignation as president of Gran Colombia in 1830, a resignation that was less of a dignified exit and more of a Shakespearean tragedy. Bolivar's political enemies, smelling blood in the water, circled like sharks. They were all too happy to see the once mighty Liberator brought low, his authority slipping through his fingers like sand. Amidst this political coup d'etat, Bolivar delivered a series of last speeches that were intended to rally support, but ended up being more of a swan song. These speeches were a masterclass in pathos, filled with the kind of rhetorical flourishes that would have made Cicero nod in approval. Yet, despite the eloquence, there was a palpable sense of desperation. Bolivar was like a stage actor delivering his final soliloquy, aware that the curtain was about to fall. He spoke of unity, of liberty, of the sacrifices made for the dream of a free South America. But for all the fire and brimstone, the audience, both literal and metaphorical, was already looking elsewhere. His resignation was a reluctant admission that the grand vision of a united continent had hit a wall. It was a bitter pill to swallow for a man who had once declared, "I am the sun that will illuminate the skies of Colombia." In reality, Bolivar's sun was setting, and the horizon was anything but rosy. The myth of Bolivar riding off into the sunset as a triumphant liberator is a tale as tall as they come. The truth is, his final years were marked by isolation and abandonment. Many of those who once hailed him as a hero had turned their backs, tired of his autocratic style and relentless pursuit of an ideal that seemed increasingly out of reach. His dream of Gran Colombia had crumbled, and with it, his influence waned. Economically, the situation was dire. The coffers of Gran Colombia were emptier than a pirate's treasure chest after a bad night at the tavern. The fiscal mismanagement that plagued his administration was a persistent thorn in his side. It didn't help that the global markets weren't exactly throwing a fiesta for South American exports. The economic house of cards collapsed, leaving Bolivar's administration scrambling to pay debts and finance the ongoing chaos. Politically, the landscape was chaotic. The regional leaders, who had once been allies, were now rivals with daggers drawn. Bolivar's former confidant, Francisco de Paula Santander, was among those leading the charge against him, a betrayal that stung like 1,000 paper cuts. Bolivar's centralized vision clashed head-on with the burgeoning nationalist sentiments sprouting like weeds in the political garden. The result? A fragmented political landscape where everyone was out for themselves. Bolivar's personal struggles mirrored the political disarray. By 1830, his health had deteriorated to the point where even his legendary stubbornness couldn't mask the inevitable decline. He took to writing letters, pouring out his frustrations and hopes, as if trying to immortalize his legacy in ink. "My only wish is to see America happy," he wrote, though the reality of his unfulfilled dream must have weighed heavily on his mind. As he retreated to the coastal town of Santa Marta, Bolivar was a shadow of his former self. The man who had once crossed the Andes with a ragtag army was now confined to a bed, his body ravaged by disease. It was a tragic end for a man who had spent his life chasing a vision that was as elusive as a mirage. Bolivar's story is a poignant reminder that even the mightiest figures are subject to the whims of fate and the frailties of human nature. The legend of Simon Bolivar is compelling, filled with drama, heroism, and ambition. But the truth, as always, is more complex. His final years paint a picture of a man undone by the very forces he sought to control, a liberator who found himself in chains of his own making. In the grand tapestry of history, Bolivar's legacy is both a cautionary tale and an inspiration. His struggles highlight the challenges of leadership and the perils of unchecked ambition. Yet, his vision of a united South America continues to resonate, a testament to the enduring power of dreams. As Bolivar's chapter draws to a close, we are left with a story that is as multifaceted as the continent he sought to unite, a story of triumph and tragedy, of hope and despair, of a man who dared to dream the impossible and paid the ultimate price for his ambition. Bolivar's tale didn't end with a final curtain call. His legacy took on a life of its own, much like a ghost haunting the halls of history. When he died in December 1830, it wasn't the dramatic blaze of glory some might expect for a man of such legend. Instead, it was a quiet, almost muted affair in a dusty Colombian town. The Liberator succumbed to tuberculosis at the age of 47, an age when some are just hitting their stride. Talk about a plot twist. This was a man who had rattled the chains of the Spanish Empire, only to be undone by a microscopic foe. His death left a vacuum as vast as the Amazon, and in its wake came a flurry of myth-making. Bolivar the man became Bolivar the martyr, a symbol of a cause larger than life itself. Within months, he was being painted as a saint of liberty, a status that conveniently glossed over his more autocratic tendencies. In Venezuela, they even went as far as to preserve his heart in a glass jar. Nothing says enduring legacy like a preserved organ on display, right? The romanticized Bolivar was a hero who could do no wrong, a liberator whose vision was as pure as driven snow. But history, as we know, is never that simple. Reality had a habit of crashing this idealized party. The economic and political instability that plagued his liberated lands was like a bad hangover after the revolutionary high. Gran Colombia, the grand experiment Bolivar had championed, had splintered into separate nations almost as soon as his heart beat its last. Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador each went their own way, squabbling over borders, resources, and power like siblings fighting over a toy chest. The dream of unity was as dead as disco, leaving a fractured continent in its wake. Economically speaking, Bolivar's vision was like a house built on sand. The economies of the newly independent states were in shambles, struggling to find their footing in a world that was anything but forgiving. Foreign debt was piling up faster than you could say liberation, and the infrastructure needed to support stable growth was about as robust as a paper umbrella in a monsoon. The idea of a thriving, united economic powerhouse was a mirage, dissipating into the harsh realities of post-colonial life. Politically, the landscape was a minefield. The power vacuums left by Spanish withdrawal were quickly filled by local strongmen with their own agendas. The very caudillos Bolivar had warned against were now the new power brokers, wielding influence with an iron fist and a penchant for intrigue. It was a messy, chaotic scramble for control, as if the revolution had merely swapped one set of masters for another. In this environment, the lofty ideals of liberty and equality were often sidelined in favor of expedience and ambition. Yet, despite, or perhaps because of, these challenges, Bolivar's legacy continued to cast a long shadow. His life story became a beacon for future revolutionaries and leaders, who saw in Bolivar a blueprint for change and a testament to the power of a single determined individual. Che Guevara, for instance, carried a portrait of Bolivar as he tried to ignite his own brand of revolution, though with decidedly mixed results. For them, Bolivar was a symbol of resistance against tyranny, a reminder that the quest for freedom was worth the struggle, even if the outcome was uncertain. But let's not get swept away in the grandeur of it all. Bolivar's story also serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked ambition. His vision for a unified South America was undoubtedly noble, but his methods, marked by authoritarian rule and a disregard for local conditions, left much to be desired. It's a classic example of what can happen when vision outpaces reality, when ideals run headlong into human nature's messier tendencies. Bolivar's life teaches us that leadership is as much about listening as it is about leading. His failure to fully appreciate the desires and demands of the people he sought to liberate ultimately undermined his grand plans. The lesson: even the most charismatic leaders need to remember that true change comes from collaboration, not coercion. It's a lesson that's as relevant today as it was in Bolivar's time, as we continue to grapple with the complexities of power, ambition, and the ever-elusive dream of unity. In the end, Simon Bolivar remains a figure of enduring fascination, a man of contradictions, whose life was as turbulent and transformative as the continent he sought to unite. His story is a reminder that history is never black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of shades, each revealing a different facet of the human experience. Bolivar's legacy is both a triumph and a tragedy, a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who dare to dream big, even when the odds are stacked against them. So, as we close the chapter on Bolivar's tumultuous journey, let's remember him not just as the liberator, but as a man who dared to challenge the status quo, who dreamed of a better world, and who, despite his flaws, left an indelible mark on history. His legacy, like the Andes he once crossed, looms large, a symbol of the complex dance between idealism and reality, between myth and the gritty truths of life. And with that, we leave Bolivar's story with a nod to the lessons of the past and a hopeful eye on the future. Because in the messy business of revolution, the journey is as important as the destination. Picture a city where the sound of clinking coins was almost as common as the clang of church bells. That's Pisa in the late 12th century, a bustling trading hub where merchants haggled over silk and spices while dodging the odd donkey cart. Amidst this vibrant chaos, a young boy named Leonardo Fibonacci, or simply Fibonacci to his friends and future math enthusiasts, was growing up. Born around 1170, this kid was destined to change the way the world counted its beans and everything else. Fibonacci's father, Guglielmo Bonaccio, wasn't your average medieval dad. Forget farming or blacksmithing. Guglielmo was a customs officer in the service of the Pisan merchants. His job took him to Bugia, a port in what is now Algeria, and like any good dad with a keen eye for opportunity, he toted young Fibonacci along for the ride. It was in this North African setting that Fibonacci's love affair with numbers truly began. Think of it as a study abroad program before Erasmus made it cool. Now, If you're imagining Fibonacci sitting at a desk, scribbling away with a quill, let's pause for a reality check. The schools of the time taught Roman numerals, clunky symbols that made even basic calculations feel like deciphering an ancient code. But in the bustling markets of Buja, Fibonacci encountered something revolutionary: the Hindu-Arabic numeral system. These numerals, the ones you and I use every day, were as slick as a merchant in a silk suit compared to their Roman counterparts. Suddenly, math wasn't just about counting sheep. It was an elegant dance of digits, and Fibonacci was ready to lead. So, what was so special about these new numbers? For starters, they included a zero, a concept the Romans hadn't quite wrapped their heads around. Imagine trying to do algebra without zero. It's like trying to make pizza without dough. Fibonacci saw the potential here, and it was like a light bulb went off, or would have if Edison had been around. He realized that these numerals could simplify trade, finance, and even everyday life. And let's face it, a system that made tax calculations less nightmarish was bound to catch on. Fibonacci's eureka moment wasn't just a personal epiphany, it was a cultural collision. The Hindu-Arabic numerals had traveled from India through the Islamic world, carried by scholars and traders who appreciated their practicality. Fibonacci, blending his Pisan roots with North African insights, became the perfect ambassador for this numerical revolution. He was like a DJ mixing two tracks to create a sound that everyone wanted to hear. But why does this matter? Well, Europe was on the brink of an economic transformation, and a better number system was like oil in the gears. Trade was expanding, and merchants needed a reliable method to track their goods and profits. Enter Fibonacci, who, upon returning to Pisa, penned the book Liber Abaci in 1202. This wasn't just any book. It was the Harry Potter of mathematical texts, spellbinding in its impact. In it, Fibonacci not only introduced the new numerals, but also demonstrated their use in practical problems like currency conversion, weight measurements, and even calculating interests. It was the medieval equivalent of a self-help bestseller, showing Europe how to get its mathematical act together. As we chuckle at the thought of Fibonacci's aha moment, let's remember that his early life was more than a series of fortunate events. It was a confluence of cultures, trade winds, and a child's insatiable curiosity. Fibonacci wasn't just a numbers guy. He was a bridge between worlds, a kid from Pisa who saw beyond the horizon of his time. So next time you effortlessly balance your checkbook or calculate a tip, give a nod to Fibonacci, a man who turned a marketplace revelation into a numerical revolution. And to think, it all started with a boy in a port town, enchanted by the endless possibilities of numbers. From the bustling marketplace of Pisa, where Fibonacci's youthful curiosity first caught fire, our budding mathematicians set sail on what can only be described as the ultimate Mediterranean road trip, minus the Instagram posts. Think less sunbathing and more brain-bathing in cultures rich with mathematical prowess. As young Fibonacci journeyed from port to port, Genoa, Constantinople, Alexandria, he was like a sponge, soaking up knowledge from the diverse array of scholars and traders he encountered. Now, let's pause for a second and crush the myth of the solitary genius. The romantic idea of Fibonacci sitting alone under a fig tree, plucking numbers from the ether, is as appealing as it is inaccurate. The reality: Fibonacci was more like a modern-day startup founder attending a tech conference, networking his way through the intellectual elite of the Mediterranean. Every city was a new chapter in his education, each conversation a building block in his mathematical framework. Take, for instance, his time in Alexandria, Egypt. This wasn't just any stopover. Alexandria was the Las Vegas of learning, a place where the great library still echoed with the wisdom of Euclid and Ptolemy. Here, Fibonacci mingled with Arab mathematicians who were light years ahead in algebra and geometry. They had been playing with these concepts since the days when the Romans were still struggling to count with their fingers. In this vibrant intellectual melting pot, Fibonacci realized that mathematics was more than just a tool. It was a universal language, bridging cultures as effortlessly as the Mediterranean Sea connected ports. And let's talk about the numbers. The Hindu-Arabic numerals that had first dazzled Fibonacci in Buja were in full swing here. The Arab mathematicians had refined these numerals into an art form, using them to solve complex problems with an elegance that would make a ballerina jealous. Fibonacci wasn't just learning. He was witnessing a performance, one that would inspire him to take these numerical arabesques back to Europe. Yet, his travels weren't only about mathematical revelations. The Mediterranean was a hotbed of commerce, and Fibonacci was keenly aware of the economic engines driving these cities. Money was the lifeblood of these bustling metropolises, and numbers were the machinery keeping the blood pumping. Fibonacci saw firsthand how efficient calculations could streamline trade and finance, making him all the more determined to share his insights with the mercantile world he hailed from. As he voyaged across the sea, Fibonacci also encountered the Byzantine Empire, a civilization that had inherited the intellectual legacy of Greece and Rome. While the Western Roman Empire had long since crumbled, the Byzantines were still holding court, an eastern bastion of classical knowledge. Here, Fibonacci's understanding of geometry and logic was deepened, adding yet another layer to his mathematical toolkit. The Byzantines were masters of preserving and expanding upon ancient wisdom, and Fibonacci took notes faster than a modern journalist at a press conference. Fibonacci's journey wasn't just a collection of mathematical epiphanies. It was a testament to the collaborative nature of knowledge. Each port, each scholar, and each conversation contributed to a tapestry of learning that was as interwoven as the tapestries adorning the walls of the great halls he visited. He was part of a vibrant intellectual ecosystem, one where ideas were exchanged as freely as the goods in the markets. It's easy to get swept up in the tale of Fibonacci as a lone genius, but the truth is far more compelling. He was a conduit for the mathematical brilliance of multiple cultures, a messenger bringing the best of the Mediterranean's intellectual heritage back to Europe. His achievements were not just his own. They were the culmination of centuries of scholarship, a collective endeavor that transcended borders and languages. So, as we picture Fibonacci sailing back to Pisa, his mind brimming with the knowledge of the ancients, let's remember that he was not alone on this journey. Behind every equation he penned, behind every numeral he popularized, was a chorus of voices from across the Mediterranean, each one contributing to the symphony of numbers that would soon sweep across Europe like a mathematical maelstrom. As we continue this exploration of Fibonacci's life and legacy, let's keep our eyes on the horizon, where the next chapter of his story awaits, an unfolding saga of numbers, ideas, and the relentless pursuit of understanding. As we continue to sail with Fibonacci back to Pisa, his head spinning with mathematical marvels, let's talk about the piece de resistance of his intellectual journey, his magnum opus, the Liber Abaci. Imagine a 1,202-book drop that, despite the lack of a printing press, managed to ripple through Europe like a juicy piece of gossip at court. This wasn't just scratching some notes in the sand. It was a full-blown numerical manifesto. Fibonacci wasn't just offering a new way to count. You know, one that didn't make you feel like you needed a degree in ancient hieroglyphics just to buy a loaf of bread. It was introducing Europe to the Hindu-Arabic numeral system, a concept so revolutionary it was like offering someone a smartphone in the age of carrier pigeons. His book was the medieval equivalent of a TED talk that went viral, centuries before viral was even a thing. Now, the Liber Abaci wasn't just a dry, dusty tome filled with equations that made your eyes glaze over. Oh no, it was a practical guide, tailored for merchants and businessmen of the time. Think of it as the ultimate medieval business manual. Fibonacci knew his audience, and he wrote with a merchant's flair, tackling real-world problems like currency conversion, profit margins, and the ever-perplexing issue of weighing goods. This was a book that spoke the language of trade, not just of academia. Here's a fun fact. Before Liber Abaci, European merchants were relying on Roman numerals. Yes, those clunky, awkward symbols that made even a simple addition feel like solving a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. Picture a world where calculating your profits involved a system with no zero, where the number 1989 looked like a countdown to the millennium, Mkmx6. It's no wonder medieval bookkeeping was a nightmare. Try balancing a ledger when your numbers look like a page from a Latin grammar book. But let's not romanticize the myth of the lone genius too much. Fibonacci's work was a product of collaboration with the mathematical minds he'd encountered on his travels. The Liber Abaci was the result of a cultural exchange program that spanned continents and centuries. Fibonacci wasn't just a mathematician. He was a curator of ideas, blending the intellectual currents of the Mediterranean into a coherent whole. He was standing on the shoulders of giants, and he knew it. The impact of Liber Abaci was profound because it came at a time when Europe was on the cusp of an economic transformation. Trade was expanding faster than a medieval fair on market day, and merchants were desperate for a more efficient way to keep track of their transactions. Fibonacci's new number system was like a breath of fresh air in a stuffy Roman numeral room. It promised to streamline trade, simplify calculations, and most importantly, save time, which, as any good merchant knows, is just as valuable as money. But why did Fibonacci's book make such waves, despite being released centuries before Gutenberg's printing press revolutionized the dissemination of information? Well, it turns out that word of mouth was a powerful tool even in the Middle Ages. Just as today's social media influencers can sway public opinion with a single post, medieval scholars and merchants spread Fibonacci's ideas through their own networks. The Liber Abaci became a touchstone for those who sought to navigate the complex waters of commerce. Still, it wasn't all smooth sailing for Fibonacci's mathematical revolution. The transition from Roman numerals to Hindu-Arabic numerals wasn't an overnight success. For many, these new symbols were as foreign as a menu written in a language they'd never seen. In some parts, the new numerals were even met with suspicion and resistance. After all, change is hard, and old habits die harder, especially when those habits are etched into the stone columns of ancient Roman buildings. Even so, the practical benefits of Fibonacci's system couldn't be ignored. Slowly but surely, the new numeral system crept into daily life, one transaction at a time. Schools began to teach it, merchants embraced it, and the world was forever changed. The Liber Abaci wasn't just a book. It was a harbinger of the mathematical awakening that would eventually lead to the Renaissance. Fibonacci may not have lived to see the full impact of his work, but his legacy was secure. He had sown the seeds of a numerical revolution that would grow and flourish long after he was gone. His book became a cornerstone of mathematical education, a beacon guiding Europe out of the numerical dark ages. As we pause here, let's remember that the story of Fibonacci and his Liber Abaci is far from over. We've only just begun to explore the ripples this mathematical maestro sent across the pond of history. Stay tuned for more numerical adventures as we dive deeper into the impact of Fibonacci's work and the legacy he left behind, a legacy that continues to shape the way we understand numbers today. As we dive deeper into the world of Fibonacci, let's address the mathematical elephant in the room, the Fibonacci sequence. This numerical pattern has become as iconic as the Mona Lisa, yet it didn't exactly make waves in Fibonacci's own time. In fact, the sequence was buried in a chapter of Liber Abaci, like a bonus track on an album, waiting centuries to become a hit. It's a bit like discovering your grandfather's garage band recorded a song that went platinum long after he retired his guitar. So, what's the deal with this sequence? It starts off simple enough. 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on. Each number is the sum of the two preceding ones. You might think, big whoop, but hang on. This pattern pops up everywhere, from pine cones to Parthenons. Fibonacci originally used it to solve a problem about rabbit reproduction. Yes, rabbits. Picture Fibonacci musing over a hypothetical bunny boom in a perfectly controlled environment, unaware that his furry fascination would one day become a cornerstone of mathematical coolness. Centuries after Fibonacci's time, the sequence found its way into the limelight, thanks in part to a growing fascination with patterns in nature. The sequence is evident in the spirals of sunflower seeds and the swirling shells of nautiluses. It's like nature's own version of a secret code, and once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality is, the sequence is a tool, a handy one, sure, but not some mystical key to the universe. If anything, it shows how mathematics can elegantly describe natural forms, not that the universe was built on Fibonacci's musings about bunny populations. Fast forward to the 19th century, and the Fibonacci sequence was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for its moment. Enter the mathematician Eduard Lucas, who brought the sequence into the mathematical spotlight. Lucas named it after Fibonacci, cementing Leonardo's legacy as the accidental prophet of natural patterns. Lucas's work propelled the sequence into academic circles, and eventually it sauntered into popular culture like a mathlete at a talent show. And here's where things get really interesting. The sequence's allure isn't confined to textbooks and nature. It has found its way into art, architecture, and even the stock market. Take the golden ratio, a number approximately equal to 1. 618, which is closely related to the Fibonacci sequence. Artists and architects have used this ratio to create visually pleasing compositions, from the Parthenon to Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. It's as if the sequence has a backstage pass to the greatest hits of human creativity. But before we get carried away by its artistry, let's debunk a popular myth. The idea that everything great was meticulously planned using the golden ratio or Fibonacci numbers. Sure, these patterns can be found in many designs, but often that's more serendipity than strategy. The appeal of these numbers lies in their universality and elegance, not necessarily in conscious application by every artist or architect. The truth is, many masterpieces were created by craftspeople who had never heard of Fibonacci, let alone consulted his sequence. Speaking of unexpected places, the sequence has even crept into modern finance. Some traders use it to predict stock market trends, claiming it helps identify potential reversals based on Fibonacci retracement levels. It's a bit like using a medieval map to navigate Wall Street. But hey, if it works, it works. The key here is that the sequence offers a framework, not a crystal ball. It's more of a guide than a guarantee, a reminder that while history may not repeat itself, it often rhymes in numbers. So, was Fibonacci a mathematical prophet, or just a guy who liked rabbits a little too much? Maybe a bit of both. His sequence, while not revolutionary in its own time, has become a testament to the timeless nature of mathematical beauty. It's a reminder that sometimes the seeds of greatness take centuries to bloom. Fibonacci's true genius wasn't in predicting the future, but in understanding the elegance of numbers, an elegance that resonates across time and disciplines. As we marvel at the sequence's journey from obscurity to fame, let's not forget the economic and cultural contexts that enabled its rise. The Renaissance, with its emphasis on rediscovery and innovation, set the stage for a mathematical renaissance as well. The printing press amplified its reach, while the scientific revolution provided the tools to explore its implications. Fibonacci's sequence became a symbol of the interconnectedness of knowledge, a bridge between the past and the future. And so, our exploration of Fibonacci continues. We've traced his travels, celebrated his contributions, and unraveled the myths surrounding his sequence. Yet, the story isn't over. In our final part, we'll journey back to the core of Fibonacci's legacy, examining the enduring impact of his work on modern mathematics and beyond. Stay tuned, dear listener, as we prepare to wrap up this numerical odyssey. There's still more to uncover in the tale of the man who turned numbers into an art form, a legacy that echoes through time like a never-ending spiral. So here we are, at the grand finale of Fibonacci's numerical escapade, ready to dig into the legacy of this mathematical maestro. It's time to peel back the layers and see how a guy who started with rabbit math left a mark on the world that endures to this day. Think of it as the historical equivalent of finding out your favorite band's greatest hits album was actually a compilation of unreleased demos. First off, let's appreciate the fact that Fibonacci's contributions weren't just about numbers. They were about making life easier. Before his Hindu-Arabic numeral system came along, doing math was like trying to solve a crossword puzzle where every answer was written in hieroglyphics. Fibonacci handed Europe a cheat sheet, and it was about time. The Roman numeral system was less user-friendly than a rotary phone at a tech convention. Just imagine trying to calculate tax or interest with symbols that look like they belong on a Caesar's tombstone. Fibonacci's system was the app update everyone needed, streamlined, efficient, and ready to handle the complexities of a burgeoning medieval economy. His work with the Liberator wasn't merely a flash in the pan. It was the spark that ignited the Renaissance flame. Like a mathematical Moses, Fibonacci led Europe out of the numerical wilderness and into a new era of enlightenment. The Liberator became the foundation upon which future mathematicians would build their towering equations. It was the stepping stone for the likes of Kepler, Newton, and Leibniz, who would go on to use the principles Fibonacci popularized to unlock the universe's secrets. Talk about a legacy. It's like being the opening act for the greatest mathematicians of all time. Now, let's talk about the Fibonacci sequence, that numerical celebrity that somehow managed to score a starring role in nature's greatest hits. It's hard to deny its allure when you see it reflected in the spirals of galaxies or the symmetry of a sunflower. This isn't just math. It's like nature's way of winking at us as if to say, see, I've got a sense of humor too. But before we get too starry-eyed, remember that while the sequence is fascinating, it's not the be-all and end-all of the universe's blueprint. It's more of a delightful quirk, a reminder that while math can describe many things, it's not the answer to life's mysteries. It's a tool, not a magic wand. But Fibonacci's influence doesn't stop there. Let's fast forward to the financial world, where his impact is as tangible as a crisp dollar bill. Traders and analysts, ever the number-crunching wizards, have adopted Fibonacci's principles to predict market trends. His sequence has become a staple in the art of technical analysis, used to forecast future price movements with a level of reverence that borders on the sacred. It's like peering into a crystal ball, only this one is backed by centuries of mathematical rigor. Sure, it's not foolproof. Nothing ever is. But it provides a framework, a way of making sense in a world that often seems anything but. As we reflect on Fibonacci's legacy, it's clear that his real genius wasn't just in the math itself, but in his ability to blend cultures and ideas. He was a mathematical diplomat, an ambassador of numbers, whose work bridged gaps between civilizations and laid the groundwork for a global language of mathematics. His legacy isn't just the numbers. It's the spirit of curiosity and discovery he embodied, a testament to the power of open-mindedness and intellectual exchange. But let's not sugarcoat it. Fibonacci wasn't a wizard with a wand. He didn't magically transform the world overnight. The adoption of his ideas was a slow burn, a gradual shift that took centuries. His work faced skepticism and resistance, proof that changing the status quo is never a walk in the park. Even in the face of progress, old habits die hard, and the transition from Roman numerals to Hindu-Arabic numerals didn't happen in a single eureka moment. It was a process, a game of inches rather than miles. And yet, despite the challenges, Fibonacci's influence seeped into the cracks of history, shaping the way we interact with numbers today. His work paved the way for the scientific revolution, influencing fields as diverse as physics, engineering, and economics. It's the kind of legacy that makes you wonder what other hidden gems are waiting to be discovered in the pages of history. Stories of people who dared to think differently and left ripples that continue to echo. As we wrap up this numerical odyssey, let's take a moment to appreciate the blend of myth and reality that surrounds Fibonacci's story. It's okay to be a little starstruck by numbers, to marvel at the elegance and beauty they can reveal. But let's also remember the human side of the equation, the curiosity, the collaboration, and the courage to challenge convention. Fibonacci's legacy is a reminder that the quest for knowledge is a journey, not a destination. It's a path paved with questions, where each answer leads to new mysteries and discoveries. In the end, Fibonacci was more than a mathematician. He was a pioneer of thought, a testament to the power of curiosity and the human spirit. His name has become synonymous with numerical curiosity because he dared to look beyond the numbers, to see the world not just as it was, but as it could be. And that, dear listener, is the true legacy of Leonardo Fibonacci, a legacy that continues to inspire, challenge, and ignite the flames of discovery in all of us. So next time you find yourself pondering the spirals of a seashell or the patterns in a pine cone, give a nod to Fibonacci, a man who saw the world through a lens of possibility and left us a legacy of wonder. In the bustling streets of early 17th century London, where the scent of horse manure mingled with the smoke from countless chimneys, a man named Henry Hudson prepared for a voyage that would become the stuff of legends, and the occasional punchline. You see, Hudson was part of a generation of explorers that were more than just sea adventurers. They were the rock stars of the Renaissance, albeit ones who traded in sextants instead of electric guitars. And like any great rock star, Hudson was chasing a dream, the elusive Northwest Passage, a mythical shortcut to the riches of Asia that had eluded sailors for decades. To get a sense of why Hudson was so eager to sail into the unknown, You have to consider the economic oomph behind these voyages. It was all about spices, those little flavor bombs that could make even the blandest mutton taste like a feast. We're talking about cloves, nutmeg, and cinnamon, worth their weight in gold and capable of sending European powers into a frenzy. To put it in perspective, in 1602, a single pound of nutmeg could fetch enough cash to buy you a house in London. That's right, 1 pound of nutmeg could make you a homeowner in a market that was every bit as cutthroat as today's. But spices weren't just culinary gold. They were geopolitical dynamite. The Portuguese and the Spanish had been hogging the spice trade like a kid with the last slice of pizza, thanks to their control over the sea routes around Africa and through the Americas. The rest of Europe was itching to get in on the action, particularly the Dutch and the English, who were tired of paying through the nose for a decent curry. Enter the Northwest Passage, a supposed Arctic shortcut that promised to bypass the Iberian stranglehold and deliver spices straight to the doorsteps of northern Europe. Henry Hudson was the man for the job, or so the armchair explorers back home thought. These were the same folks who believed the Arctic was just a chilly version of the Mediterranean, conveniently ignoring the fact that it was less sun-soaked paradise and more frozen wasteland. With maps drawn by people who'd never seen a polar bear, expectations were set laughably high. Hudson was expected to sail his ship, the Half Moon, through a maze of icebergs and come out the other side with a cargo hold full of cinnamon sticks and cloves. Easy, right? The reality, as Hudson quickly discovered, was about as far from easy as you could get. Sea travel in the 1600 was less glamorous adventure and more floating disaster waiting to happen. Ships were made of wood, held together with a mixture of hope and tar, and as reliable as a paper umbrella in a monsoon. The Half Moon was a prime example, being just 70 feet long and about as watertight as a leaky boot. On board, Hudson had a crew of about 20, a motley collection of seasoned sailors and a few unfortunate souls who probably wished they'd stayed on dry land. Then there was the food. Hardtack biscuits that could double as harky pucks and salted meat that tasted like it had been marinated in sea brine. If you were lucky, you might catch a fish or two, but scurvy was an ever-present threat, and a fresh lemon was as rare as a clean shirt. The conditions were harsh, and morale was often as low as the thermometer. Despite these challenges, Hudson set sail in 1609, eyes fixed on fame and fortune, and while he may not have found the Northwest Passage, he did manage to discover the river that now bears his name, the Hudson River, which is kind of like setting out for the moon and landing in New Jersey. But hey, it wasn't all for nothing. Hudson's voyages helped lay the groundwork for Dutch colonization in North America, and you could argue he was a pioneer of failed quests that somehow end up being successful in unexpected ways. Hudson's story is a testament to the absurdity and ambition of the age, when men in woolen stockings dared to dream big and sail into the icy unknown. They were driven by a mix of greed, glory, and a good dose of ignorance, armed with maps that were more art than science. And while the Northwest Passage remained elusive, Hudson's legacy sailed on, a reminder that sometimes the journey, and the occasional misadventure, is the real discovery. As we sail forward into the frigid waters of Henry Hudson's first 2 voyages under the English flag, let's unpack the myth versus reality of these Arctic escapades. Picture this. It's 1607, and Hudson is staring down a map that's more wishful thinking than geographical precision. He's convinced there's a northern route to Asia, and not just because he's an optimist. The English Muscovy Company has entrusted him with what is essentially mission impossible. Find a passage over the top of the world. Just a casual Sunday drive, right? Hudson's first voyage in 1607 was like a frozen front row seat to Mother Nature's harshest show. The ship, Hopewell, was a sturdy little vessel of about 80 tons, which sounds impressive until you realize that's less than the weight of a blue whale. With a crew of 12, Hudson set out not just to find the mythical passageway, but also to prove that the Arctic wasn't as terrifying as everyone thought. Spoiler alert, it was worse. The Arctic welcomed them with open arms and a fistful of icebergs. These icy behemoths were less like majestic sculptures and more like giant maritime roadblocks, eager to turn ships into shipwrecks. And if you think navigating icy waters was a breeze, imagine trying to do it without modern conveniences like GPS or even a decent map. Hudson and his crew had to rely on the stars and a whole lot of guessing, kind of like trying to find Wi-Fi in a coffee shop that doesn't believe in technology. Speaking of technology, let's talk about the ship's amenities, or the lack thereof. The Hopewell wasn't exactly a luxury liner. The crew's quarters were cramped, and the food was a culinary adventure in blandness. Hardtack, a type of biscuit that could double as a frisbee, was a menu staple. It was complemented by salted meat that had all the appeal of a well-worn boot. And scurvy. Oh, it was the uninvited guest at every meal, since fresh produce was as rare as a snowball in July. As the Hopewell pushed further north, the challenges multiplied like rabbits. The cold was so intense it could freeze the whiskers off a walrus, and the crew faced frostbite as a constant companion. Yet, amidst the ice and cold, Hudson's determination was as unyielding as the icebergs surrounding him. He managed to reach as far north as the island of Spitsbergen, part of the Svalbard archipelago. It's a place so remote that even polar bears probably consider it a bit too far from civilization. Despite the formidable conditions, Hudson's 1607 voyage wasn't a total bust. He didn't find the Northwest Passage, but he did gather valuable information about the Arctic region. And while he didn't return with spices or silks, he did bring back tales of the icy wilderness that would fuel further exploration. His journey was a testament to the idea that sometimes the value lies not in what you find, but in what you learn along the way. Undeterred by the cold reception from the Arctic, Hudson set sail again in 1608, because why learn from past mistakes when you can repeat them, right? This time, his goal was to find a northeast passage above Russia. Spoiler alert, Moscow wasn't rolling out the red carpet for spice traders. The voyage was fraught with the same icy hazards, and navigating the choppy waters of the North Sea was akin to trying to solve a Rubik's Cube during an earthquake. Hudson's second voyage introduced a new set of challenges, including crew dynamics that were about as harmonious as cats in a bathtub. When you're stuck on a tiny ship for months, personal space becomes a luxury, and tempers can flare like gunpowder near an open flame. Add to that the language barrier. Hudson's crew was a mix of English and Dutch sailors, and you've got a recipe for high seas drama worthy of a reality TV show. Despite these challenges, Hudson pressed on, reaching as far as Novia Zemlya. But once again, the Arctic ice proved impenetrable. It was like trying to break into Fort Knox with a butter knife. Faced with the harsh reality that the Northeast Passage was a frozen fantasy, Hudson was forced to turn back. But this voyage wasn't a total wash, either. Hudson's reports on the Arctic conditions were critical in shaping future explorations. His accounts were like Yelp reviews for future explorers, albeit with more emphasis on frostbite than fine dining. Hudson's first two voyages under the English flag were a mix of ambition, misadventure, and a bit of good old-fashioned naivete. While he didn't discover the Northwest Passage or any other shortcut to Asia, his expeditions helped pave the way for future exploration of the Arctic. And although he faced icebergs, scurvy, and a crew that probably wanted to mutiny just to get back to the warmth of a pub, Hudson's tenacity left an indelible mark on the map of exploration. So, as we wrap up this chapter of Hudson's icy adventures, remember, the path of discovery is rarely a straight line. It's more like a tangled string of Christmas lights, full of knots and unexpected detours. And while Hudson's voyages over the Arctic didn't yield the riches of the East, they enriched the world's understanding of what lay beyond the horizon. Stay tuned, because the next part of Hudson's journey is set to navigate even choppier waters, both literally and figuratively. As we sail away from the frosty failures of Hudson's earlier Arctic escapades, we find our man ready to roll the dice one more time. It's 1609, and Henry Hudson, now under the banner of the Dutch East India Company, those savvy merchants who knew a good investment when they saw one, is gearing up for another attempt at finding the elusive Northwest Passage. This time, Hudson's got the Half Moon, a ship that, while still no luxury cruise liner, was a bit more seaworthy than his previous floating disappointments. The Half Moon was Hudson's ticket to fame, or at least that's what the investors hoped. They were betting on Hudson to crack the code of the Arctic and deliver the spice-laden goods that would make everyone rich enough to swim in a pool of nutmeg, Scrooge McDuck style. But as is often the case in the world of exploration, things didn't go exactly as planned. Spoiler alert. Hudson did discover something, but let's just say it wasn't the shortcut to saffron. Hudson set sail with his crew in April 1609, aiming for the Northeast Passage over Russia. Now, you'd think after 2 failed attempts, Hudson might have reconsidered the whole icy doom route, but he was nothing if not persistent. Unfortunately, Mother Nature had other plans. The ice pack was as unyielding as ever, and after a few rounds of icy pinball with the Half Moon, Hudson had to face the music. The Arctic wasn't budging, and he was fresh out of options. So, what does a seasoned explorer do when his primary mission goes belly up? Improvise, of course. Hudson decided to pull a geographical U-turn and head west towards North America. It was a bold move, kind of like deciding to change your vacation from Iceland to Cancun halfway through your flight. But Hudson had heard whispers of a passage through the continent and figured it was worth a shot. The Dutch East India Company might not have been thrilled with his sudden change of plans, but hey, explorers gotta explore. In September 1609, Hudson and his crew found themselves navigating up what would later be known as the Hudson River, an accidental discovery that proved to be a bit of a geographical jackpot. The irony here is almost Shakespearean. Hudson was chasing a passage to Asia, and instead found himself charting the course for future Dutch colonization in a land that would eventually become New York. It's the kind of serendipity that makes you wonder if the universe has a sense of humor, or if it just likes to watch stubborn explorers zig when they should zag. Hudson's exploration of the river was no small feat. The Half Moon sailed roughly 150 miles upstream, and the crew's interactions with the local Native American tribes were a mix of cautious diplomacy and cultural curiosity. It's worth noting that the indigenous peoples Hudson encountered were probably less than thrilled about these strange newcomers poking around their backyard, but the exchanges were mostly peaceful, with trading of goods that didn't involve musket fire. And what did Hudson find along the river? Not spices or silk, but fertile land and trading opportunities that would eventually lead to Dutch settlements. It's a classic case of finding gold while looking for silver, or more accurately, finding Manhattan while looking for cinnamon. Hudson's journey up the river laid the groundwork for New Amsterdam, a settlement that would evolve into the bustling metropolis of New York City. So, while Hudson didn't find the Northwest Passage, he did stumble upon one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in history. Not a bad consolation prize. Hudson's third voyage serves as a testament to the unpredictable nature of exploration. It's a story where the intended destination was never reached, yet the unintended discoveries were arguably more significant. The economic implications were enormous, as the Dutch would go on to establish a foothold in the New World, trading fur and other goods. This was a big deal, considering the power dynamics of the time. The Dutch were carving out a slice of the pie in a world where the Spanish and Portuguese had been hogging the dessert cart. It's also worth mentioning that Hudson's decision to pivot west wasn't just a stroke of luck. It was a calculated risk driven by the economic pressures of the age. The spice trade was the 17th century equivalent of today's tech industry, a high-stakes game where the rewards were immense, but the path was fraught with challenges. Hudson's river exploration may have been a detour, but it turned out to be a detour with dividends. So, what do we take away from Hudson's unexpected success? It's a reminder that in the world of exploration, and perhaps life itself, the journey rarely goes as planned. Sometimes, the greatest discoveries are the ones you never set out to find. Hudson might never have reached the Spice Islands, but he did leave a legacy that reshaped the map of the New World. And while his voyages were filled with missteps and miscalculations, they also underscored the relentless human drive to seek out the unknown, no matter how many wrong turns it takes to get there. As we wrap up this chapter of Hudson's adventures, keep in mind that his story is far from over. The river that bears his name would become a key artery for trade and settlement, shaping the future of a nation. And Hudson, well, he's not done sailing into history just yet. There's more to explore, more to discover, and more to ponder as we continue to unravel the legacy of this tenacious navigator. Stay tuned, because the next leg of Hudson's journey promises even more twists, turns, and tales of high seas exploits. As we set sail once more on the turbulent seas of history, let's dive headlong into Henry Hudson's final voyage, a journey that will be etched into the annals of exploration infamy. It's 1610, And Hudson, a man not easily deterred by past failures, is back at it again with a new ship, the Discovery. His aim, to finally uncover the Northwest Passage, a quest that by now must have felt like chasing a mirage in the desert. But hey, third time's the charm, right? The Discovery was a sturdy vessel, weighing in at around 55 tons, which might sound impressive until you realize that's roughly the weight of a single African elephant. With a crew of 23 men, Hudson set his sights on the Canadian Arctic, a place renowned for its scenic icebergs, and as he would soon discover, its ability to trap ships like a fly in amber. The investors back in London were counting on Hudson to deliver the goods, literally. The pressure was on to find that lucrative shortcut to Asia, and Hudson was determined to make it happen, come hell or high water. The economic backdrop of Hudson's 1610 voyage was as volatile as a keg of gunpowder. The spice trade continued to be the golden goose of European economies, and the English, not content to let the Dutch and Iberians hog all the glory, were desperate for a piece of the action. The Northwest Passage was the holy grail of sea routes, a mythical channel that promised to bypass treacherous voyages around Africa or the Americas. But, like many things too good to be true, it was also highly elusive. Hudson's journey took him into the heart of the Arctic, through what is now known as Hudson Strait, and into Hudson Bay. Clearly, the man had a knack for naming things after himself, not a bad strategy for someone whose legacy was otherwise a bit of a mixed bag. By autumn, Hudson and his crew found themselves in James Bay, a smaller inlet on the southern end of Hudson Bay. This is where things started to go south, not geographically, but certainly in terms of morale and survival prospects. The winter of 1610-1611 in James Bay was less winter wonderland and more frozen nightmare. Imagine being stranded in a desolate, icy wilderness with nothing but dwindling supplies and a ship that might as well have been a wooden prison. The Discovery's crew faced bitter cold, hunger, and the creeping dread of an Arctic winter with no end in sight. It's the kind of situation that makes you reconsider your life choices, like agreeing to sail to the edge of the known world for a handful of nutmeg. Hudson's leadership during this time was put to the test, and let's just say he didn't exactly pass with flying colors. The line between heroic leadership and sheer folly is a thin one, and Hudson was teetering on it like a tightrope walker in a hurricane. His decision-making became increasingly erratic, and the crew's resentment grew like barnacles on the hull. Tension simmered as food supplies dwindled, and the crew's diet became a macabre game of what's still edible. Spoiler, not much. By the spring of 1611, the crew's patience had worn as thin as the ice on a thawing river. Hudson, it seemed, had lost the plot, and the crew had lost faith in his ability to lead them safely home. Enter the mutiny, a plot twist as inevitable as a flat tire on a cross-country road trip. It was June 1611 when the crew finally snapped, staging a mutiny that saw Hudson, his teenage son, and a handful of loyalists cast adrift in a small shallop. The mutineers decided they'd rather take their chances navigating the icy labyrinth themselves than endure another day under Hudson's command. The fate of Hudson and his companions remains one of history's haunting mysteries. Left to the mercy of the elements, they vanished into the annals of time, their final chapter unwritten. The mutineers, meanwhile, managed to limp their way back to England, where they faced justice, or at least a semblance of it. The English authorities, not known for their leniency, were more interested in the economic implications of the failed voyage than in doling out punishment. The mutineers were eventually pardoned, a pragmatic decision that underscored the cold calculus of empire. Dead men tell no tales, and live ones might yet chart a profitable course. Hudson's last voyage is a stark reminder of the thin line between exploration and exploitation. It's a story where dreams of glory collided with the harsh realities of survival, where ambition and hubris danced a dangerous tango in the frozen north. The myth of the heroic explorer is seductive, but the reality is often as brutal as an Arctic wind. Hudson was a man driven by vision and tenacity, but also by the same forces that have propelled countless explorers into the unknown: greed, desperation, and the tantalizing promise of discovery. As we pause at this pivotal moment in Hudson's tale, let's reflect on the lessons of his final voyage. It's a cautionary tale of leadership under duress, of the human capacity for endurance and the breaking point of loyalty. Hudson's story is far from over, and the legacy of his expeditions continues to ripple through history like the wake of a ship on a moonlit sea. But for now, let's leave Hudson in the icy embrace of his final adventure, a navigator who sailed too close to the edge of the world and paid the ultimate price. Stay tuned, as the final chapter of Hudson's saga promises even more revelations and reflections on the tumultuous tides of history. As we drift away from the icy mists of Henry Hudson's final, ill-fated voyage, it's time to piece together the puzzle of his legacy. No, this isn't about glorifying a man who, let's face it, had a knack for finding trouble in the most frozen corners of the world. Instead, it's about understanding the impact that one determined and arguably stubborn explorer had on the tapestry of history. First, let's tackle the myths. The romanticized image of the brave explorer. It's as enduring as a bad penny. Hudson has often been painted as a heroic figure, a fearless sailor who dared to venture where no man dared to tread. While there's a kernel of truth to that, the reality is a bit more nuanced. Sure, Hudson was brave, but he was also a man driven by less lofty ambitions. He wasn't just seeking the thrill of discovery. He was chasing economic gain and a bit of glory on the side. The Northwest Passage was the 17th century equivalent of a winning lottery ticket. Find it, and the riches of Asia would be yours for the taking. Let's not forget that Hudson was operating in a time when maps were as much fiction as fact. Cartographers of the era might as well have been writing fantasy novels, for all the accuracy their maps held. The Arctic was depicted as a navigable paradise, a notion as realistic as expecting a polar bear to serve you tea. Hudson's voyages, albeit unsuccessful in the traditional sense, helped correct these misconceptions. His reports and charts filled in the blank spaces of the world map, turning fantasy into reality, one perilous journey at a time. Hudson's legacy isn't just about failed quests and icy endings. His discovery of the Hudson River, for instance, laid the groundwork for Dutch colonization in North America. This was no small feat. The fur trade that blossomed along the river was a cash cow that funded further exploration and settlement. In economic terms, Hudson helped crack open a new world of opportunities, for better or worse. By the time the Dutch planted their flag on Manhattan, the seeds of what would become a bustling metropolis had already been sown. Now, onto the darker side of exploration, the human cost. Hudson's voyages weren't just perilous for him. His crews often paid the price. From frostbite to starvation, the risks were real, and the rewards were anything but guaranteed. Hudson's last voyage ended in mutiny, an act that speaks volumes about the desperation and disillusionment faced by those men. They weren't just explorers. They were human beings caught in the crossfire of ambition and survival. Romanticize it all you want, but the reality was brutal. Hudson's story is a testament to the human spirit's relentless drive to push boundaries, even when the odds are stacked against you. It's about the folly and bravery of exploration, two sides of the same coin. His voyages remind us that exploration isn't just about discovering new lands. It's about challenging the very limits of what we know. It's about the triumphs and the failures, the map-making and the myth-busting, the dreams and the disasters. In the broader scope of history, Hudson's expeditions helped shape the geopolitical landscape of the time. His discoveries opened up trade routes, altered maps, and shifted power dynamics. The English and Dutch were given new avenues for expansion, while indigenous populations faced the encroachment of European settlers. Hudson's voyages, like many before and after, were a double-edged sword. So, as we wrap up this saga, let's remember Hudson not just as a name on a river or a bay, but as a symbol of the age of exploration, a time when men risked everything for the promise of something more. His legacy is etched in the maps he helped create and the world he helped connect. And while he might not have found the Northwest Passage, Hudson did navigate the treacherous waters of history, leaving a wake that continues to ripple through time. In the end, Hudson's tale is as much about us as it is about him. It's about our innate desire to explore, to seek out the unknown, and to chart a course through uncharted waters. It's about the risks we're willing to take for the chance to glimpse what lies beyond the horizon. Hudson may have sailed into oblivion, but he also sailed into history, leaving behind a legacy that, while complicated, is undeniably impactful. So, here's to Henry Hudson. a man who dared to dream big, even if those dreams sometimes ended in icy chaos.